Hello everyone. I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. I shouldn't be writing this, not because I don't want to remember it, but because I'm not supposed to be able to, not anymore. And I think that thing is still watching, still waiting for me to forget again like I have 100 times before. Like I almost did yesterday, like I probably will tomorrow, because every time I get close to piecing it together, every time I feel that it's behind my eyes and start to see the cracks in the world that let it in, something shifts, something slips through. The seams of my memory and rewrites just enough to keep me quiet, to keep me docile. But tonight something's different. Tonight I feel clear. I feel awake in a way I haven't in years. And I think I finally know how to hold the truth in my head long enough to get it out before it fades again, before it smothers me back into sleep like it always does. So I'm going to try to tell you about the house. The one I moved into 5 years ago on the edge of the woods, the one with the rotting porch end. The crooked chimney and the smell in the basement like old blood and wet leaves. The house I was so proud to buy on my own. Cheap because of its age, cheap because of its history, though the real estate agent didn't tell me that part. She just smiled too wide and handed me the keys like they burned her fingers and got back into her car without saying goodbye. But I was blind then, full of excitement and plans, and it wasn't until the third night that I heard the breathing in the walls, slow and what like something dreaming in the plaster. And when I pressed my ear to it, there was this low murmur underneath, like voices trying to speak through water, like they were learning to form words just by listening to me live, and I should have left then. I should have packed a bag and burned the place to the ground, but it was subtle at first, almost playful, the way the lights would flicker when I was reading in bed, the way the radio would change stations on its own to things that didn't have words, just static and whispers and an occasional scream that sounded too close to be coming from the speaker. And then the dreams started. Dreams of endless hallways and doorways that opened into meat, into teeth, into versions of myself that cried blood and mouthed words I couldn't understand. And I'd wake up in strange places, on the roof, in the basement. Once curled up in the back of my own closet with dirt under my nails and a mouth full of something that tasted like copper and rot. And I'd laugh it off, tell myself it was stress, that I just needed rest, until I found the photographs in the attic. Dozens of them, black and white, showing the same room over and over, but each time a little different, like it was alive, like it was shifting, reshaping itself for whoever was looking. And in the last photo, the room was empty except for a single figure crouched in the far corner with its back to the camera and its head twisted all the way around, smiling, smiling, always smiling. And the worst part is that I recognized the sweater it was wearing. It was mine. The one I'd thought I'd lost, the one that vanished the same week the dream started, and I tried to throw the photos away. I did, but they came back, tucked under my pillow, slipped into the pages of books I hadn't opened, even one pinned to the ceiling above my bed. So it was the first thing I saw when I woke up gasping for air and choking on a scream I couldn't remember letting out, and I started to notice other things then, patterns, rhythms, like the way the walls would pull slightly if I stared long enough, or how the mirror showed parts of the house I didn't recognize, staircases that didn't exist, rooms I'd never entered but felt I had, deeply, as if I'd lived in them in another life, or was still living in them now in a different version of myself that never left, never escaped. And sometimes I'd see people walking past my windows even though I lived miles from the nearest neighbor, people with faces too smooth, too perfect, like wax melting under invisible heat, and they'd stop and look in, eyes like holes bored into raw wood, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe until they were gone. And I don't know how long it was before I found the door. The one that shouldn't exist, hidden behind a shelf in the basement, small and metal and marked with symbols that twisted and squirmed when I tried to look at them too long. In the air behind it was thick and wrong, like breathing through oil. But something pulled me forward, not physically, not yet. Just a pressure in my skull like fingers pushing from the inside out. And I opened it. God help me. I opened it and went down the stairs that shouldn't have fit in the space they occupied. And they never ended. They just spiraled down, and the deeper I went, the more the air throbbed with sound. Not music, not words, just this humming, like the house was alive and dreaming, and I was crawling down its throat into something older. Then time, something that didn't understand me but wanted to, desperately, and I remember reaching the bottom. I remember the room with the black floor and the hanging lights that flickered like they were underwater, and in the center was a chair, just a chair. But I knew it was for me. I knew that whatever had been watching was waiting for me to sit, to give myself up. And I almost did. I swear I almost did. But something stopped me, something sharp and cold in my chest, like a sliver of myself that hadn't been eaten yet, and I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the surface. I just remember light and cold and waking up in my bathtub with my clothes soaked and my skin covered in words I didn't recognize, carved so shallow they faded in hours but burned for days. And ever since then I've been slipping, losing time, forgetting faces, hearing things in my sleep that feel like instructions, like I'm being shaped, rewritten slowly by something patient, something hungry. And every time I try to tell someone, they just look at me with empty smiles and change the subject, like they're part of it, like they've been hollowed out and filled with whatever it is that lives in the walls of my house. But I know it's not just my house anymore. I see it in other places now. I see the signs, the flickers, the impossible shadows in the corners of rooms that shouldn't have corners, and I think it's spreading. I think it's using me to open more doors, to drag more people down into that endless dark, and I can't stop it. I can barely hold on to myself long enough to write this. But if you're reading it, if it's not too late, don't come looking for me. Don't go near that house. Don't follow the paths in your dreams or answer the knocks that come in threes at midnight. Because once you see it, once you know it sees you, there's no forgetting, no running, no waking up ever again. Story 2. I don't know if there's a right way to start this, because the thing that happened to me didn't begin like most things do. It didn't arrive with thunder or blood or some obvious mark on the wall that screamed evil lives here. It began slowly, like a cold breath on the back of your neck that you think is just a draft, like a missing sock you swear you left on the bed, like forgetting why you walked into a room. Only I didn't forget why I walked in. I forgot I ever lived there at all, and that was the first warning. Not the nightmares or the bruises or the voices whispering from inside my own reflection. No, it was the gaps, the holes in memory so clean and precise they didn't even feel like forgetting. They felt like the memories had never existed to begin with, like entire days or weeks were nothing more than rotten film peeled off the reel of my life. And I only noticed when I came back to myself in a strange apartment I didn't remember moving into, with furniture I didn't recognize, and framed photographs of people I couldn't name, and I laughed. You know, I actually laughed because I thought it was a dream, maybe a long one after a night of too much drinking or some breakdown I didn't see coming, but the bruises on my arms were too real, the coldness in my gut too deep, and there was a notebook on the counter, black leather, with the words "Do not trust her" written in block capitals on the first page, and the rest filled with a jagged mess of warnings, desperate entries in my own handwriting that I didn't remember writing, entries that said things like "She comes in through the mirror when you sleep," and "If you hear humming, do not open your eyes," and "They are wearing your face, don't talk to them." And beneath that, scratched so deep into the page it nearly tore through, just the word "run" over and over until the ink bled through 10 more pages, and I still didn't believe it, not completely, until I found the mirror turned around to face the wall and ducked, taped at the edges like something was trying to crawl out. And when I turned it around I saw myself, but not me, something with my face, but eyes that were just a little too wide, a smile that showed too many teeth. And it blinked when I didn't, and then it tilted its head and mouthed the word "home," and I dropped the damn thing and it shattered, and the sound it made was like glass and bone and screaming. And I blacked out for hours, and when I came to the mirror was whole again, no cracks, just leaning gently against the wall and humming something low and cold and wet. And from that night on the world began to fray at the edges. Colors went wrong, grass turned purple in the corner of my eyes, streetlights buzzed like they were whispering to each other. And every face I passed looked at me too long, held eye contact a little too intensely, like they all knew something I didn't, like they were watching to see if I'd figure it out, and I did, eventually, in pieces, in flashes. Like the moment I saw my own reflection standing still when I moved, or when I picked up the phone and heard myself crying on the other end, or the time I looked down at my hands and they weren't mine, they were older, thinner, marked with symbols I had never seen before but felt like I had carved into something once, long ago, or maybe not long ago, maybe just last night, because time stopped working properly too. Sometimes an hour would pass in the blink of an eye. Other times I would stand in the same place for what felt like days, and the sun would never rise, and food stopped tasting right, and I stopped needing sleep. Or maybe I just stopped wanting to, because every time I closed my eyes I was back in that room, the real room, the one behind the mirror, where the walls were covered in breathing paper and the ceiling dripped something thick and black and the air felt like teeth grinding together. And in that room I wasn't alone. There was always her, always the other me, crouched in the corner, eyes glowing like coals, skin shifting like it couldn't decide what shape to be, and she would smile and reach for me with hands made of shadow and bone, and every time I screamed I woke up with her voice in my throat, and then the changes started on the outside. Subtle at first, like strangers calling me by the wrong name or recognizing me in places I'd never been, people telling me I'd said things I couldn't remember, doing things I swore I never did, until the day I came home. And the locks had been changed and I saw myself through the window, eating dinner with people I didn't know, laughing like I belonged, and I realized she'd taken my place. She'd crawled out of the mirror and into my life, and I was the reflection now, trapped on the wrong side of the glass. And I pounded on the window, screaming, crying, but they didn't hear me, they didn't see me, and she just looked up slowly, raised her glass, and smiled at me, and I ran for days, or maybe weeks, sleeping in alleyways, eating out of garbage cans, trying to remember who I really was before she started eating pieces of me. And sometimes I'd forget my name, forget how to talk, forget how to move like a person and not like something hollow pretending to be one. And I'd feel her behind my eyes, watching, pushing, waiting for me to give up and let her back in. And I almost did. I almost let her win. But I found another notebook, one I must have hidden long ago, before I lost the first time. And it said, "You are not the first, but you can be the last. If you burn the mirror, if you burn the name." And I didn't know what it meant, but I felt it was true. Felt it in the way you feel thunder before it hits. And I found the mirror again, not the first one, but the original, the real one, the one that showed not who you are but what you truly are. And I smashed it, burned it, buried the pieces in 6 different states, and for a time it was quiet. For a time I thought I'd won, but I see her in reflection still, not always, not clearly, but enough to know she's not gone, just waiting. And I think I've become the notebook now, the warning for whoever comes next, because she moves on when she's bored, when she's fed. And if you're reading this and you've seen yourself blink when you didn't, if you've heard humming in your sleep, if you felt like something's wearing your skin just a little too loosely, then it's already too late. She's seen you, she's chosen you, and no matter how far you run or how long you deny it, one night you'll look into the mirror and it won't look back, it'll smile. Story 3. It began with the flies, not a swarm, not something cinematic, just one, and then another, tapping against the window by my bed every morning when I woke up, fat and black and slow like they'd been bred inside something already dead. And I didn't think much of it at first because old houses have pests, I told myself. Old houses rot in places you can't see, under the floorboards, behind the walls, deep in the pipes where the water never runs. But then they kept coming, every day. Always just one. More than the day before, like they were multiplying in step with something else, something I couldn't see but could feel sitting just behind my heartbeat. A slow weight pressing inward from every direction. And it wasn't just the flies either. There were the sounds too. Low rattles in the walls at night. Distant groans like the house was breathing in its sleep. And sometimes, when I stayed too still for too long, I could swear the silence had depth to it, layers, like voices buried in static, or whispers filtering through a mouthful of dirt. And when I finally called someone to look into it, an exterminator who showed up with 2 white gloves and a crooked smile. He took one look at the crawl space and said, "There's something old in here," and then laughed like it was a joke, but didn't come back the next day or return any of my calls. And that's when I started noticing the rot, not the kind you can clean with bleach or scrape away with a knife, but something soft and black that crept along the corners of things, along my baseboards and ceiling corners and picture frames, and it smelled wrong, not like mold or mildew, but like copper and sour milk and teeth, like something that had once been human but wasn't anymore, and I would clean it. Every day I would scrub it off until my knuckles bled, and then I would wake up the next morning and find it in new places, on my pillow, on the inside of my mirror, under my tongue, and still I told myself it was nothing, stress, mold, madness, anything but what it really was, which is that I brought it here. I let it in, not on purpose, not knowingly, but I opened something, cracked something I shouldn't have touched, not with my hands, but with my need, because grief is a door and guilt is the key. And when my brother died and left that empty hole in me where love used to live, I went looking for a way to fill it, not with people, not with therapy, but with rituals and books and the kind of prayers that taste like dirt when you say them out loud. And I found a name in one of them, not in ink but in something darker, scratched into the margins of a burned page, Velmuth, and I didn't say it out loud, not at first. I only traced it with my eyes and imagined it whispered in my ear. But that was enough, I think, because after that I started seeing him, my brother, not clearly, not like a ghost, but as a shape in the dark places, a scent in the hallways, a flicker in the corner of my eye. And then I heard him, his voice, coming from behind doors that weren't open, saying my name in the voice he used when we were kids and scared. And I followed it. I always followed it, until I found myself in rooms that shouldn't exist, narrow closets that stretched for miles, bathrooms with walls that pulsed like flesh, staircases that ended in mirrors too dark to reflect anything but teeth. And I kept going, kept digging, kept feeding the rot because I wanted more. Because if this thing could give me back the sound of his voice, even if it was warped and wrong and wrapped in suffering, then I didn't care what it cost. Not then. Not until I started changing. Until my eyes began adjusting to the dark a little too well. Until I started hearing things before they were said. Until I caught myself speaking in voices that didn't belong to me. And still I told myself it was worth it, because I saw him. I touched his hand in a dream, and it was cold and slick like something pulled from the bottom of a lake. And he said, he was hungry, so hungry, and I understood then that whatever piece of him remained wasn't alone, wasn't free, and needed more than my prayers. It needed offerings, and I didn't argue. I didn't question, because I was already too far gone. And it began simply, with dead birds found on my porch, with blood under my fingernails I couldn't explain, with strangers disappearing from the news, from memory, from reality itself, and I kept feeding him, feeding it, until I wasn't sure where he ended and I began, until I heard other voices in the walls too, others who'd done the same, others who'd made bargains in basements with no stairs and cellars that breathed, and they warned me, not with words but with screaming, endless screaming that only stopped when I bled, when I offered pain in return for silence. And then came the nights I woke up covered in soil with no memory of how I got there, standing in the woods behind my house with bare feet and a jaw full of teeth that didn't feel like mine. And the buzzing, the flies, they started following me everywhere, into stores, into other people's homes, even into my dreams. And I started seeing others like me, hollow-eyed, twitching, mouths that never fully closed, and we never spoke, but we always knew each other. Always nodded in passing like addicts who'd traded the same piece of their soul for a lie they still wanted to believe. And eventually I stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped caring about anything but the thing beneath the floor, the voice that had become my gospel, the rot that had become my skin. And I started to forget things, important things, like how to smile, how to cry, how to hear my own name without wincing. And I think I died, once, for a while, but it didn't take. I just woke up somewhere darker and wetter and full of mouths whispering praise to something older than light. And I came back with a mark on my chest in the shape of a fly's wing and the knowledge that I wasn't just feeding it anymore. I was becoming it. I was becoming the vessel, the preacher, the doorway, and I think that's what it always wanted, not blood, not bodies, but a voice, someone to speak the name, someone to open new ears and new eyes and new mouths to the truth that rot is love. That decay is the only God that answers prayers, and I'm trying to stop. I really am. But it's in me now. It's always humming, always hungry, and every time I try to leave this house, the world folds in strange ways, and I find myself back at the beginning, standing in the living room with the flies at the window and the smell of teeth in the air and my brother's voice in the walls saying, "Please let me in." And I do. I always do. Because I don't know who I am without this hunger. Because I think I might have always belonged to it. Because I don't think I ever had a brother at all. Story 4. I don't think anyone really understands what it means to be haunted until they stop thinking about ghosts as things that float and rattle chains and start realizing that real haunting is quieter, slower, deeper. Like rot in the bones of your house or in your own reflection that doesn't quite sync with your movements. And that's how it started for me. Not with screams or scratches or anything dramatic, just a feeling. A subtle displacement like gravity pulling slightly in the wrong direction. Like the angles of my apartment were bent in ways my eyes couldn't catch, but my stomach could feel. And I used to think it was just stress or exhaustion. Because I'd been alone too long and grieving too hard, and maybe the world was softening at the edges to make space for my sorrow. But then the lights started flickering, not just flickering, but dimming in a rhythm, like breathing, and I told myself it was wiring. Old buildings do that. But then the clock started changing too, blinking 3:07 a.m. Every night, no matter when I went to bed, even if I unplugged them, even if I removed the batteries. And I know that sounds impossible, but it kept happening. And then came the water, black and thick from the tap like ink or oil. And I called the landlord, but he didn't answer. And when I went downstairs to his unit, the door was open. But the apartment was empty, gutted, with dust so thick it looked like no one had lived there for decades. And that's when I started thinking maybe something was wrong, not with the building, but with me, because I started hearing my own voice calling to me from other rooms, always just out of sight, always too far to chase, and sometimes I'd wake up in different clothes or with dirt under my nails or blood on my feet. And I couldn't remember how it got there, and I'd find bruises on my arms shaped like fingerprints that didn't belong to my own hands. And the dreams, God, the dreams were the worst part, because I wasn't myself in them. I was something else watching myself, or someone else walking around inside my skin, moving like me, speaking in my voice, but smiling too wide and standing too still. And I tried to convince myself it was just my mind breaking under pressure, because grief does that, right? It carves holes in you that let in the dark. But one night I woke up with my mouth full of something soft and wet, and when I ran to the bathroom and spat it out, it was hair, a handful of dark, matted hair that wasn't mine. And when I looked up into the mirror, I swear it didn't reflect what I felt in my body, because the face looking back at me was smiling and I wasn't. And I smashed the glass and the smile didn't break, and I slept with the lights on after that. But the lights don't help when the shadows start moving on their own, when they stretch toward you instead of away from you. And I could feel something inside my walls, something pacing, breathing, whispering things in a language I almost understood, like if I listened too long it would take root in my head and grow into something alive. And I started noticing little changes in my apartment, like furniture shifted by inches overnight, drawers open when I'd locked them, photographs with faces that were subtly different, like their eyes were darker or their mouths were just a little wider. And I stopped inviting people over because they kept saying the place felt wrong, cold, like being watched, and they never stayed long. And one day I woke up and every mirror was covered in handprints from the inside, greasy, child-sized hands that smeared the glass like something was trapped behind it. And I wanted to leave. I tried, but every time I packed a bag and opened the door, it led back into the apartment. Like the hallway outside folded back in on itself. And the more I tried to escape, the more the place changed. The windows stopped showing the outside and started reflecting other rooms, rooms I'd never seen before, with furniture that wasn't mine and walls that pulsed like they were alive. And I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, Just sat there for hours listening to the scratching behind the walls and the soft breathing coming from the vents, and then I started seeing her, not clearly, not at first. Just a blur in the corner of my vision, long hair dragging behind her, skin pale and slick like something drowned, and every time I looked straight at her she was gone, but I felt her, always behind me, always just out of reach. Whispering words I couldn't quite make out, but that filled my chest with dread and longing at the same time. And one night she finally spoke clearly, standing at the end of my bed, and she said, "You brought me back." And I didn't know what she meant until I remembered the box, the one I found at the thrift store last winter, covered in wax and twine and filled with bones and ash, and a note that said "Do not open" written in shaky, faded ink. And I opened it anyway because I was lonely and desperate, and I wanted to believe there was something else, something beyond this world, and there was, and it followed me home, and I think that's when she came, not all at once, but piece by piece, crawling through the cracks in reality I had made. And now she wears my face sometimes, walks around in my body when I sleep, and people have started treating me differently, like they know something's off, like they see something I don't, and I catch glimpses of myself in windows or videos looking at the camera when I know I wasn't, and the reflection smiles when I'm crying, and I'm not sure how much longer I'll be me, because she's getting stronger, because I can hear her thoughts sometimes, and they feel warm and hateful and hungry. And last night, I found my own handwriting on the walls, words I didn't write that said letter IN, and I think I already have, because when I look at my hands, they don't feel like mine. When I speak, I sometimes don't recognize my own voice, and when I sleep, I dream of drowning in black water while she watches from the surface with my face, and the worst part is, I'm starting to like it. Story 5. I never believed in anything beyond what I could see with my own eyes, never thought ghosts or demons or anything supernatural could touch me, and maybe that arrogance is what opened the door because I used to laugh at people who told their stories, mock them in hushed voices, call them broken or desperate or gullible, and then something happened to me. Something I can't explain no matter how many times I try, no matter how carefully I choose my words or how many facts I line up in my favor. Because it started with something small, a door that wouldn't stay closed, not in a dramatic horror movie way, just gently ajar every time I walked past it, like the air pressure was off or the hinges were worn down. And I didn't think much of it until I heard the creaking in the middle of the night, footsteps that weren't mine crossing the floorboards when I was sitting perfectly still, and I told myself it was the house settling, the pipes, the wind, the fridge compressor, anything other than what I feared it might be. And then one night I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the hallway, motionless, too tall, too narrow, like someone had stretched a person's shape until it barely held together, and I froze, just watched as it stood there watching me, not moving, not blinking, just being, and I turned on every light and tore the house apart looking for proof, looking for anything out of place, and I found nothing, no footprints, no handprints, no forced locks, just the faintest trace of wet earth in the carpet where it had been standing, like something had dragged itself up from the soil and left part of the grave behind, and I told myself I was exhausted, hallucinating, that it was stress from work and lack of sleep, but it came back. Again and again, always at the edge of my vision, always just standing, and soon I began to see other things, shapes moving behind curtains that weren't moving, faces and reflections that didn't match my own, shadows that stretched the wrong way, and I stopped sleeping because I was afraid I wouldn't wake up, and the longer I stayed awake the worse it got, like my sanity was the only wall holding it back, and it was rotting away brick by brick. And then it spoke to me, not in words, but in thoughts. Feelings, memories that weren't mine pouring into my skull like ink, memories of drowning, of burning alive, of being buried with my mouth open, screaming for someone who never came, and I started to forget things, simple things, like where I lived, my name, how long I'd been in the house, and I'd find notes written in my own handwriting saying things like, "Don't trust it, you're not alone," and once, "You were the doorway," and that's when I stopped going outside. Stopped trusting myself to be in the world, because people looked at me like they knew, like they saw something behind my eyes I couldn't hide, and I began to feel it crawling under my skin, whispering to me in voices I thought were my own thoughts until they told me to do things I would never do. And then I started waking up in places I didn't fall asleep, covered in dirt or blood or salt, surrounded by symbols carved into the floor I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. And I know how this sounds. I know it's the kind of thing people laugh at or write off as madness, but this isn't madness. This is something else, something older, something hungry, and I've tried everything to stop it, locked myself in closets, drowned myself in bathtubs only to wake up gasping with water pouring from the walls, smeared ash over every surface of the house, burned everything I owned, even scratched symbols into my skin hoping pain would be louder than the whispering, but it never helped, nothing helped. And now I see it everywhere, not just in my house, but in the cracks in the sidewalk, in the smiles of strangers, in the way mirrors don't line up with reality anymore, in the way my own voice sometimes comes back to me out of sync. Saying things I didn't say, thinking thoughts I didn't think, and I don't know how long I've been living like this, whether it's been days or weeks or years, because time doesn't move normally anymore. Not in here, not with it, and the clocks in the house all run backwards now. Or worse, they stop for hours and then skip forward to times that don't exist. And I found a message carved into the underside of my kitchen table that says, "You already died." And sometimes I think that's true, but this is some cruel echo of life where I'm being punished or watched or consumed piece by piece until there's nothing left but a voice that used to be mine speaking from a mouth I no longer recognize and a face that isn't real. And I've tried to leave. God knows I've tried. But the doors won't open, or they open to places I don't recognize, sometimes to blackness, sometimes to forests I've never seen, and once to a field of graves all with my name, all freshly dug, and I ran until my lungs burned and the sky tore open with a sound like bone splitting, and I ended up back here, always back here, like the house is a loop, a trap, a living thing, and it feeds on me every time I give in, every time I scream, every time I believe I'm still human. And maybe I'm not. Maybe I've become the thing I feared. Maybe that figure at the end of the hallway was me all along, watching from the outside in, waiting to take my place. And I can't be sure of anything anymore, not even the shape of my own hands, not even the texture of my own memories. And sometimes I hear my mother's voice calling from the floorboards asking why I did it, what I let in, and I don't have an answer. I just cry until my eyes dry out and my tears come as black sludge that smells like old smoke and wet stone. And I see faces now, in every surface, writhing, screaming, asking me to help them, but I can't. I'm no longer strong enough to fight it, to resist the pull. And now when I sleep, I dream in someone else's memories, someone who died here long before I moved in, someone whose bones are still beneath the floor, someone who also thought they were safe. And when I wake, I taste dirt and hear digging beneath the house, deeper every night, like something is coming up. Not out of the earth, but out of the world behind it, the place under places. And I think it's almost here. I think it's already through. And if anyone finds this, if anyone reads these words, I beg you, don't try to help me, don't come here. Don't look into the windows. Don't even think about this place for too long, because it remembers everyone who does, and it watches, and it waits, and once it finds you, once it sees you, it never lets go, not ever. Not until your face is forgotten and your soul is buried in silence. Story 6. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to me was losing my job or dying alone, but I was wrong, so terribly wrong, because nothing compares to this, to being hunted not by a person or a beast, but by something that wears the shape of your life like a costume, something that waits until you stop paying attention to the small things, to the way your footsteps echo wrong in your apartment, or the way your shadow sometimes lags behind you for just a fraction of a second too long. And I remember the exact moment I started to suspect that something was watching me. It wasn't a dramatic realization, just a quiet sense that I was being studied, like I was a test subject in an invisible lab where the walls were made of mirrors and air ducts whispered my name at night. And it got worse slowly, methodically, like a disease that doesn't announce itself but crawls through your bloodstream until one day you look in the mirror and your smile doesn't reach your eyes anymore, and your memories feel like someone else's dreams. And it began with the sounds, tapping in the walls at 3:17 every morning like clockwork. And at first I thought it was rats or maybe plumbing, until I started noticing that it was tapping the same pattern over and over. Tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause, tap. And one night I tapped it back and it stopped completely, like I had broken some rule I didn't know existed. And from that night on, I started to hear breathing in the walls, long, slow inhales like something was sleeping just behind the plaster. And I would put my ear to it and hear muffled murmurs like lullabies sung underwater, and I told myself I was just sleep-deprived and paranoid. I told myself people hallucinate when they're isolated too long, but I wasn't hallucinating the objects in my apartment going missing. I wasn't hallucinating the way my toothbrush would be wet when I woke up, or how my computer would be logged into folders I never opened, and I damn sure wasn't hallucinating the writing that started to appear on my bathroom mirror, messages like, "Don't look at it," or "IT knows you know," scrawled in something like oil or bile, or worse, something thick and dark and foul-smelling that wouldn't come off with any cleaner no matter how hard I scrubbed. And when I tried to take pictures, it wouldn't show up, not even a trace. Just my own face staring back, looking more tired and distorted each time. And I tried to stay with friends, but no one would have me for more than a night, saying things like, "I didn't sleep well," or "Your energy's just off," or worse, not saying anything at all, just avoiding eye contact and nervously glancing at corners of their own homes like they were afraid I'd brought something with me. And I think I did, because after I left one place, my friend called crying, said there was something standing in her hallway all night just breathing, said she could hear it wetly blinking in the dark, and she begged me never to come back, not even for my things. And I understood, because by then I knew it wasn't just the apartment. It was me. I was the center of it, or the magnet, or maybe the bait. And I started seeing things in reflective surfaces that didn't belong. My reflection smiling when I wasn't, blinking wrong, sometimes standing still even when I turned away. And I once saw it mouth the words, "I'm waiting," and then grin with teeth that didn't belong in any human mouth. Too many, too sharp. And I stopped owning mirrors. Smashed them all with a hammer until the floor looked like a frozen lake cracking open, and I still didn't feel safe, because even puddles on the sidewalk shimmered with things that weren't mine. And then came the dreams, not regular nightmares, but vivid, unbearable things where I was paralyzed and something climbed over me, not walking but dragging itself by its arms, heavy, wet, leaving behind the sound of slick flesh against wood. And its face was my face, but hollowed out like a skull trying to wear skin again. And it would lean into my ear and whisper my name, my real name, the one I've never told anyone, the one I forgot until it said it. And I'd wake up to claw marks on the floor around my bed and dirt under my fingernails, sometimes in my mouth, gritty and cold and full of tiny bones. And then things escalated in a way that no one could deny, not even me. Because one night, I woke up standing in the park 2 blocks from my apartment, barefoot, in pajamas, with a dead bird in my hand and no memory of leaving. And when I looked back at my building, the lights in my apartment were on, and I could see someone in my window, someone wearing my face watching me. And I ran. I ran so hard I threw up while halfway home. But when I got back upstairs, there was no one there. And everything was exactly how I left it except for the photos on the wall. All of them had the same figure in the background, tall and thin and just slightly out of focus, closer in each one like it was moving toward me through time. And I burned them all in the sink, tried to get rid of everything that felt infected. But it didn't matter, because it didn't live in the objects. It lived in the space between things, in the silences, in the gaps in memory. And I started to forget whole chunks of time, hours, sometimes days. And during those gaps, I would find things written on my walls and symbols I couldn't read, but somehow understood. Instructions, maybe warnings, maybe threats, and one of them translated to, "It eats what you don't remember." And that broke something in me, because I started to realize that I wasn't just being watched. I was being hollowed out, replaced, and whatever it is, it doesn't kill you. Not all at once. It digs in and pulls pieces away until what's left is just enough to keep breathing and screaming. And now I hear it behind my voice when I speak. I see it flicker through my expressions when I pass by reflective glass, and sometimes I feel it controlling my limbs when I move, like I'm puppet by memory and fear and hunger. And I think it's almost finished with me. I think soon it will be all that's left, and I won't know I was ever here at all. Just a whisper in the dark corner of a room no one goes into anymore. A chill when someone walks through the space I once stood. And if you've read this far, if you're still listening, please, I beg you, don't try to help me. Don't pity me. Don't come looking, because it's hungry and curious and wants it. Knows your name, it will never let you go. And once it's inside, you won't even want it to. Story 7. It started with the smell. Not a strong or aggressive stench at first, but something faint and strange like rotting leaves mixed with metal and earth. Something I thought was just an old pipe or mold under the floorboards of the house I moved into 2 months ago after inheriting it from an uncle I never met. Some distant blood relative no one talked about, and whose funeral I didn't even attend. And I should have known something was wrong from the beginning because the house came with nothing. No photos, no furniture, no letters or bills or signs of life. Just dust, an odd silence that pressed against my ears like I was underwater. And that smell, which always seemed strongest in the bedroom closet, even though I scrubbed every inch and poured bleach into the cracks. And still it returned, stronger each time, until I began waking in the night to find it overwhelming, burning my nostrils, making me cough until I vomited bile into the sink. And sometimes when I'd look in the mirror afterward, I'd see things I couldn't explain, shapes moving behind me in the doorway or the reflection twitching just a moment after I had already moved. And once, just once, I swear I saw my own mouth smiling when I wasn't. A brief flicker like a still frame from a different movie spliced into the film of my life. And that was when the dreams began. Not dreams exactly. More like vivid memories that didn't belong to me playing out every night as I slept. Images of digging in the soil behind the house, of hiding things wrapped in plastic and twine, of screaming voices muffled by earth and stone, of a woman's hand reaching up through the mud, fingernails broken and bleeding as she clawed at the dark. Images so real that I'd wake up with dirt under my fingernails and scratches on my palms, and once even a clump of wet hair gripped in my hand, hair that didn't match my color or length. And no matter how I tried to forget, the house wouldn't let me, not when the footsteps started, soft and slow and always just out of sight, circling the room as I lay frozen in my bed, the door never opening. Yet I'd hear the sound of breathing, deep and rattling, close enough that I could feel the exhale brush across my skin. And it wasn't long before the noises turned to voices, quiet at first, whispers in the vents or behind the walls, saying things like "he knows," or "dig deeper," or "she's still there." And I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't go more than an hour without feeling like I was being watched by something I couldn't see, but could feel staring from the corners of the room, the corners of my eyes. And I told myself it was grief or stress or some kind of inherited madness. But that excuse started to rot the same way the walls did, with patches of black mold forming strange symbols I couldn't scrub away, spirals and runes and looping figures that gave me headaches when I stared at them too long. And the worst part was I started losing time, waking up in places I didn't remember going, like the garden shed or the basement I never unlocked. Standing in the center of the floor surrounded by circles of salt and broken glass and candles that smelled like blood and sulfur. And one night, I found a mirror under the bed, not dusty or cracked but polished clean, with a note taped to the back in my handwriting that said, "Don't trust the reflection." And after that I stopped sleeping altogether because every time I closed my eyes I saw the same woman, her face, bloated and gray, her lips torn away like she'd been chewing on her own mouth, her eyes sunken but wide, locked onto mine, and I could feel her hatred like a physical weight dragging down my chest, as if I had done something to her, as if I was guilty of some unspoken crime I couldn't remember. And maybe I was. Maybe that uncle I never met had done something that passed to me the way a curse passes through blood. Because when I finally dug up the yard, following those flashes of memory and dreams and whispers, I found the bones, 3 sets of them, small, twisted, wrapped in old sheets that had once been white, but now were stained the color of rust and grave water. And I called no one, not the police, not the papers, not my friends, because something in me knew if I acknowledged them out loud it would make it real, would wake it fully, and I was right, because from that night on I couldn't escape her anymore, the woman who started standing at the foot of my bed each night, not moving, not speaking, just staring with that rotted, swollen face and those hands twitching with fingers that pointed at my chest, accusing, judging, condemning, and every night she got closer, one step at a time, like the act of looking away gave her permission to approach. And now she's always beside me, in the corner, behind the curtain, under the table, watching with dead eyes that flicker in my dreams and shine in the dark like coals pressed into wet sockets. And the smell, God, the smell, is in me now, not just the house. I can't scrub it off my skin, can't hide it with cologne or showers or bleach. It's inside me, like the grave is blooming from my lungs outward, and strangers move away from me on the train. Clerks don't touch my hand when they give me change. Dogs whimper and bark through doors when I walk by. And even my own reflection now no longer follows my movements exactly, lagging a second behind, smiling when I cry, staring when I look away. And the other day I caught it watching me with eyes that weren't mine at all, wide and sunken and female and full of vengeance, so deep and ancient it cracked something in my mind. And I can't sleep now without chains on the door and salt in every corner and iron nails under my tongue. And even then I hear her whisper, feel her breath, feel her fingers brushing the inside of my ribs like she's digging for something that belongs to her. And maybe it does, maybe it always has. Maybe I'm just a shell she was promised long ago, because the other day I found another note, again in my handwriting, again taped to a mirror, and it said, "You were never meant to wake up." And now I don't think I ever did. I think I'm still dreaming in her memory, trapped in the echo of what he did to her, what I inherited, what I deserve, and every second that passes I feel more of myself unraveling, like I'm being emptied out and she's climbing in, slow, steady, patient. And when I speak now I sometimes hear her voice echo mine, deeper, wetter, heavier, like it's trying to synchronize, like we're merging, like soon there won't be a difference between us at all. Story 8. It started like most things do, quietly, innocently, something that slips in through the cracks of your life when you're not paying attention, when your guard is down and your eyes are tired and your routine is dull enough to make you miss the signs. And maybe that's why I didn't question it when the ceiling in my apartment began leaking a thin, steady drip of water in the corner of my living room, because I figured it was a broken pipe from the apartment above, nothing more, a minor inconvenience that could be fixed with a few calls and a few days. But the super told me there was no one living above me, hadn't been for years. In fact, that unit was sealed shut after a tenant hung himself there and wasn't found for nearly a month. And when I laughed it off, he didn't laugh with me, just gave me this strange look. This looked like he'd said too much and regretted saying anything at all. And when I asked what his name was, the dead tenant, the super only said, "It doesn't matter anymore." And that was the first night I noticed the water from the leak didn't behave like water should, because when I touched it, it clung to my finger like syrup, thick and cold and trembling like something alive. And I told myself it was just dirty runoff from old plumbing, nothing more. But then it started to spread, not just from the ceiling but across the floorboards, thin veins of dark moisture crawling out like roots or tendrils and always in the same direction, toward the hallway, closet I never used. And I'd clean it up and bleach it and tape down towels, but it always returned, not just overnight but sometimes while I was in the room watching. And it would slowly curl around my feet and feel so cold it burned. And every night I could hear it, The dripping, always the dripping, louder now, rhythmic, insistent, not from the ceiling anymore, but from inside the closet, as if something inside was dripping not water, but time, patience, hunger, and I started having dreams, not dreams really, but memories I didn't recognize, memories of standing in front of that closet with blood on my hands and whispers curling around my ears, not words, but sounds that felt like chewing or weeping or both. And I began waking up with my hands filthy, raw, nails torn like I'd been clawing at the walls in my sleep, and my bathroom mirror started to fog over with messages that vanished when I tried to photograph them. Things like, "You opened it," or "It's your turn," and sometimes just my own name, written over and over until the mirror cracked and refused to show my reflection at all anymore. And it wasn't long before I realized something was inside the closet because I could hear it breathing at night, shallow at first, then long and drawn out like someone trying to stay quiet but too close, much too close. And I kept the door locked, but each morning it would be open just a little more, not wide, just an inch or two, enough to show the darkness beyond and enough to make me feel like I was being dared to look inside. And I started sleeping with the lights on, all of them. But sometimes I'd wake up and the bulbs were unscrewed just enough to flicker and fail, and I'd hear footsteps, wet ones, like someone walking barefoot across a flooded floor, and my apartment would stink like something that had been buried for too long and dragged back into the light. And I asked the super again, begged him to tell me more. And this time he told me that no one had lived in this building since the incident, that the landlord had gone missing right after sealing up that unit, that I wasn't on any lease, that I wasn't supposed to be here at all. And when I asked him what he meant, he just said, "You should have never opened the door." And when I got home, the closet was open completely, wide like a mouth, and inside was nothing but black. Not the kind of dark you get from shadows, but the kind of dark that feels like it eats light, like it erases sound. And from inside I heard my voice calling to me, calling from deep below, like a version of me had been buried under the floor and was clawing its way back up. And I slammed the door and moved a dresser in front of it, nailed it shut. But that didn't stop the sounds. Didn't stop the wet, dragging footsteps, or the crying that came from inside the walls, or the moments where the lights would flicker and I'd see shadows that didn't belong to me stretching across the room, always reaching, always waiting. And then the neighbors started knocking. Even though I thought I had no neighbors, people from upstairs, downstairs, next door, knocking at strange hours with blank eyes and damp clothes and skin that smelled like mold and worms, asking me questions like, "Do you feel it yet?" and "Has it touched you too?" And when I told them to leave, they didn't move. They just stood there and eventually walked away in unison, all at once, like they were pulled by strings back into the dark hallways. And I stopped leaving, stopped eating, stopped sleeping, because the thing in the closet started whispering in my voice, telling me secrets I didn't want to know, things I had done in dreams that were real, things I had buried in my childhood that I thought no one remembered, and it knew them all. Repeated them back to me in a voice that sounded like mine if it were soaked in rot and dragged through a swamp. And I think it's not just a thing, not just a ghost or a demon. I think it's me, or what I left behind. A version of me that I forgot about or cast off, something I buried, something I locked away in that closet, and when I moved and I opened it again, I let it out. And now it wants to live again. It wants to wear my skin and take my place and erase me piece by piece. And I can feel it now when I talk, like my voice isn't quite right, like my thoughts echo in someone else's skull. And I look in the mirror and sometimes I don't see anything at all, no reflection, no face, just that dripping and wind. I look down, my hands are wrinkled like they've been submerged too long, and I keep hearing the whisper in my ear, even when I'm outside, even in the daylight, saying, "No one can tell who's who anymore," and I think I'm almost gone. I think I'm already on the other side of the door and something else is in my skin now, something patient, something old, something that has been waiting a long, long time for someone to look inside and find the truth we're all running from, that we are not alone in ourselves, that there is a crack in the soul wide enough for something to crawl through. And I left that door open too long. Story 9. It began when I was 8 years old and saw something in the woods behind my grandparents' house, something pale and tall and wrong. something that shouldn't have moved the way it did, with joints bending too far and arms too long and a face that wasn't really a face at all. Just skin stretched smooth and tied over something else, something watching me, waiting, and I remember running, screaming, trying to tell my grandfather, who just looked at me with eyes too old and said, "We don't talk about what lives back there." And I thought it was a dream for years, some childhood hallucination, until I saw it again when I was 22, this time outside my third-floor apartment window in the city. Standing still in the middle of the street at 3 a.m. under the flickering street lamp, its head tilted just slightly, arms slack like ropes, and I blinked and it was gone. No footsteps, no trace. Just the smell of dirt and rust and something older than time lingering in the air, and I stopped. Sleeping after that, because every time I closed my eyes I'd see it, standing at the edge of whatever room I was in, never closer than a few feet, always waiting, always watching, and I told myself it was sleep paralysis or stress, or a lingering childhood trauma. But then the photos started showing up, printed photos on my desk at work, in my mailbox, once even tucked under my pillow. Photos of me sleeping from angles inside my home that shouldn't have been possible unless someone was there. Photos of me on the train, me brushing my teeth, me looking into the mirror but not quite aligned with the reflection, like I was looking slightly away from where my body was posed, and in the corner of every photo, blurred or partially hidden, was that thing. That pale crooked figure with limbs too long and a featureless head, never moving but always there. And I changed apartments, changed cities, changed jobs, but it followed, it always followed, sometimes weeks, sometimes months between. Sightings, but never gone for long, and the dreams became more than dreams, became entire days I couldn't remember, hours where I'd wake up with dirt under my fingernails and leaves in my mouth and my feet sore like I'd been walking barefoot for miles. And sometimes I'd find drawings I didn't remember making, spirals and branches and symbols carved into my notebooks, into my walls, even into the wooden floor beneath my bed, and once I found one on the inside of my eyelid when I went to an optometrist for irritation, and he recoiled like he'd seen something monstrous and told me he didn't want me to come back, ever, and every friend I tried to tell either disappeared or stopped answering my calls. One of them left me a voicemail that was just 5 minutes of heavy breathing and a single whispered word, "hollow," and then never responded again, and I started filming myself at night, trying to catch it, trying to prove I wasn't losing my mind. And on the fourth night I saw myself get up while still asleep, eyes open but vacant, and walk to the window and start whispering in a voice I didn't recognize, a voice too low and layered and full of static like 1,000 mouths speaking through mine. And then the figure appeared behind me, slowly reaching out, fingers like broken twigs, and as it touched the back of my head the screen cut to black. No explanation, no glitch, just silence, and the file corrupted beyond repair, and every time I try again it happens the same way. And now when I look at my reflection I see it there instead of me sometimes, standing behind glass, head tilted, mimicking my movements half a second late like it's trying to learn how to be me, and people around me have started noticing. Strangers flinch when I pass. Children cry, dogs howl, and I found a note in my handwriting taped to my bathroom mirror one morning that said, "Stop pretending you're still you." And I don't remember writing it, but the pen was still in my hand and my fingers were blistered and bleeding, and my dreams have stopped entirely because I no longer sleep. I can't, not without seeing it pull me apart again and again, not just my body but my mind, my memories, peeling them away like petals. And every so often I lose time for hours or days and return in places I've never been, sometimes standing in front of trees older than cities, sometimes barefoot in shallow water under the moon, and once with my mouth filled with teeth that weren't mine, dozens of them, sharp and yellow and wrong, and I spat them out one by one and woke up in bed with blood on the pillow and none missing from my mouth. And I think now that it's not just following me, not just haunting me. I think I invited it. I think I opened something when I was 8. Not a door but a wound, a space between worlds. And whatever it has stepped through and latched onto me, or maybe stepped into me. And now I can't always tell when I'm the one in control, when I'm the one blinking or breathing or moving my lips, because sometimes I hear myself say things I didn't mean to say, things in languages I've never learned, and sometimes I wake up staring at a wall for hours, smiling, not blinking, like I'm waiting for something. And the shadows in my apartment don't move right anymore. They stretch and curl and whisper, and sometimes I see them crawl up the walls and across the ceiling, and I swear they form faces, hundreds of them, all silently screaming in perfect stillness, and no matter how far I run, how far I go, I always see it again, watching from the distance, pale and tall and patient, with hands too long and fingers that twitch like broken branches in the wind. And I've started hearing it in my phone, in the dial tone, in the static between songs, in the humming of lights just under the surface of sound, that low whispering voice calling me by a name I don't remember, a name that feels like a splinter in my brain. And I think I know now that I've already been hollowed out, already taken, already worn like a coat by something older than memory and darker than sleep. And this thing, this presence, this hunger, it isn't just mine, it's spreading, looking for more. For others like me who saw too much as children and never fully forgot. And one day soon you'll see it too, standing just outside the window, tilting its head, reaching out, and when it touches you, everything you were will begin to unravel. And you'll remember this story not as something you read, but something you lived. Story 10. It started with the smell, this faint, acidic, metallic tang that would crawl into my nose every night around 3 a.m., subtle at first, like a forgotten can of paint thinner in a damp basement. But over time it became something more invasive, more purposeful, something that felt like it was trying to remind me of a place I'd never been but had once died in. And I would wake up gasping, convinced I had suffocated in a room with no windows, thrashing at the air, clawing at my own throat while my bedroom lights flickered and my phone screen turned on by itself, displaying a photo I never took of myself sleeping with eyes wide open and mouth agape and a scream I never heard. And I didn't know who to tell, because who do you talk to when your own body is betraying your memories, when your mirror holds its reflection half a second too long after you walk away, when the static on your TV says your name under its breath like it knows your secrets better than you do. And I should have known it. Wasn't just me being tired or overworked or unstable, because things began to move in the apartment. Small things at first, like shoes placed in straight rows when I remembered kicking them into the closet. Kitchen drawers left open in the morning despite closing them the night before. All explainable by sleepwalking or forgetfulness, or maybe even loneliness playing tricks on me. But then I found a hole in the wall behind the refrigerator that I swear wasn't there before, and it wasn't just a hole. It was an opening into something that had no business being behind an apartment wall, something too deep, too cold, a narrow crawl space that seemed to stretch much farther than the dimensions of the building allowed, and I shouldn't have looked inside, shouldn't have shined my phone light into it, shouldn't have seen the figure crouched in there with its back to me, covered in long strands of hair, twitching like it was trying to hold still but couldn't control its breathing. And when it turned toward me, it had my face, not exactly mine, but a version of it, older, grayer, sallow and raw, eyes gouged out and mouth stitched shut, and I fell backward and hit my head and passed out. And when I came to, the hole was gone and the fridge was back against the wall like nothing had happened. But the dreams got worse, deeper, longer, more vivid, more wrong, dreams of being pulled apart by hands that whispered secrets into my spine. Dreams of me kneeling in that same crawl space, cutting my own face off and sewing a new one on, not with thread, but with something writhing and black. And I started to see things move under my skin when I showered, little pulses, little bulges like something squirming beneath the surface, just beneath my ribs or behind my eyes. And the doctors said I was fine, all tests clean, brain scans normal, blood work perfect. But none of them would look me in the eye for too long. And the third one flinched when I took off my shirt and said, "I'm sorry, there's something wrong with the way your shadow moves." And I laughed and said, "What do you mean?" But he just shook his head and told me to forget he said anything. And I would have tried to believe him, but by then I'd already started hearing the voice in the vents every night, breathing and whispering and sometimes laughing, not like a human, but like something pretending to be one. Something that learned how to laugh by watching someone die and mimicking the gasps. and I moved apartments, cities, even countries for a while, but it followed, always, always followed. And when I stopped running, stopped trying to escape, it got worse, more confident, more invasive, showing up in reflective surfaces that weren't mine, like the side of a kettle or the back of a spoon, staring back at me with a face like a burned mannequin wearing my skin. And I stopped sleeping altogether, and that's when the real horror started, because it no longer had to wait for dreams. It began to bleed into the waking world. People began to see it too. Strangers on the bus who'd changed seats after glancing behind me, a child screaming when I walked past her in a grocery store, and once, a blind man crossing the street turned his head as I passed and said, "You shouldn't carry it with you like that. It gets hungry." And I froze, turned, and he was already walking away, cane tapping calmly, and I couldn't breathe for hours afterward. Just sat in my car crying without knowing why, and soon after I began to feel like I was unraveling, not metaphorically but physically, like my bones were separating from each other at night and realigning in the morning, like I'd wake up just slightly different each day, teeth longer, fingernails darker, a mole that wasn't there before, or a freckle that was missing, and I stopped recognizing myself in old photos, and then I stopped showing up in them altogether. And when I tried to explain this to anyone, they'd look at me like they were waiting for a punchline, like I'd said something in a language they didn't quite speak. And it wasn't long before I stopped being able to hear my own heartbeat. And that's when I knew it had taken something vital from me, something I couldn't name but always felt before. Call it a soul, a tether, a pulse of identity. But now there's just silence inside, a cold, hollow silence, like standing in a cave beneath the ocean. And in that silence, I can hear it moving, hear it thinking, hear it replacing me. And there are gaps in my memory now, days missing, people I don't remember meeting, but who act like we're old friends, objects in my apartment I don't remember buying, food I don't eat going missing, and sometimes I wake up in clothes that aren't mine. And once I found a Polaroid of myself sleeping in a bed I've never seen, with something blurry and wide-mouthed curled around me like it was whispering love into my ear. And the longer this goes on, the more I feel like I'm not me anymore, like I'm just the thin skin, left over after something else has stepped inside, and I've considered ending it. Truly, I've stood on bridges, I've held blades, I've stared down trains, but each time, it laughs, and the shadows around me shimmer like 1,000 black hands stroking my face. And the voice says, "Not yet, not while you still have pieces left to give." And I don't know what that means, but I can feel it taking more each day, my sense of smell, my taste, my memories of my mother's face, the names of my childhood, friends, and I know soon there will be nothing left of me, and whatever's wearing my skin will walk out into the world, and no one will notice, no one will scream, no one will stop it, and it will look into your eyes, into your reflection, into your dreams, and it will smile that horrible twitching smile and say, "I remember you." And by then it will be too late for you too, and the cycle will start again, and something else will crawl out of your wall and wear your name like a mask, and you'll sit in your living room screaming with no sound while the lights flicker and something behind your eyes begins to bloom with teeth. Story 11. It started the night my brother died, not when the doctors pronounced him gone, not when I held his hand as it went cold in mine, but later, much later, when I came home to our apartment alone for the first time, and the lights wouldn't turn on even though I'd paid the bill, and the air smelled wrong, like soil and spoiled milk and something older, and the shadows seemed thicker than they should have been, pooling in corners and stretching too far across the floor like they were reaching for something, and I thought maybe it was just grief messing with me, bending my perception, because everyone tells you grief can be a trickster like that. But I knew what I saw that first night wasn't imagined, because something breathed in that apartment, not me. Not an echo, but something behind the kitchen door, slow and wet and deep. And I stood frozen in the doorway with my keys still in my hand for 10 whole minutes until I turned around and left, and I spent the night at a 24-hour diner, staring into a mug of cold coffee, wondering why I felt like I wasn't supposed to be home, like someone or something else had moved in and didn't want me there. And I went back the next morning and everything looked normal in the daylight except for my brother's room, which smelled like it hadn't been opened in years even though he'd slept there 3 nights before he died, and I tried to shake it off. Told myself I was just traumatized, that I needed sleep, so I slept, and I dreamed of him. But he wasn't really him, not exactly, because his eyes were all wrong, empty and reflective like old glass, and he didn't talk. He just opened his mouth, and the sound that came out was a deep, vibrating hum that made my nose bleed. And when I woke up, I was in the hallway on my knees with blood in my hands and my brother's bedroom door wide open, even though I always kept it shut. And inside, the smell was stronger, and the walls seemed darker, like they'd been wet at some point and had never dried fully. And that's when I heard the whisper, just faint and scratchy, like someone whispering through a fan. My name stretched and distorted and drawn out too long, and I knew it was his voice, even though I didn't want to admit it. And for the next few days, the whispers got louder, not all the time, just when I was alone, in the bathroom with the water running, or standing in the kitchen late at night, always just under the hum of the refrigerator or the buzz of the lights. And then things started to move, things I hadn't touched, like the photo of us as kids being turned face down on the shelf, or the toothpaste cap twisted on so tight I couldn't open it, or the faucet running on its own, and I told myself it was grief again. Because that was easier than believing what I felt deep down, which was that my brother never really left, not all of him, that something came back instead of him, or with him, or because of him, something that wore his death like a key into this world. And I started to remember things from the hospital, like how the monitors all flatlined at the exact same second and not gradually, and how the nurse screamed before she hit the floor, said something was crawling on the ceiling but none of us saw it, and how my brother's eyes had turned black in the final minute, not figuratively but literally, completely black like tar or oil or the surface of a dead star. And I think that's when it latched onto me, when it looked into me and saw something it liked or needed. And it followed me home and nested in the emptiness left behind when he died, and every night since then it's gotten stronger, the whispers becoming voices, the shadows moving when there's no light to cast them, reflections that don't match my movements exactly, sometimes blinking too slowly or smiling when I'm not. And the worst part is that it remembers things I don't, tells me things about my past that I've forgotten, like the night I got lost in the woods when I was 7 and thought I saw something in the trees watching me, or the time I almost drowned and someone pulled me out but I never saw who it was, and it reminds me of these things in my own voice, whispering them while I'm falling asleep so they get mixed in with dreams, and I wake up confused and sweating and not sure what's real anymore. And sometimes I find drawings in my handwriting, disturbing things I don't remember making, spiral patterns and stick figures with no eyes or too many, symbols that look like something carved into cave walls or scratched into the bark of trees, and I started finding those same symbols outside, on the side of my building, under the mailbox, even on the bottom of my shoes. And I don't know if I put them there or if it's leaving them for me. And last week I looked in the mirror and for 1 second, just one, I swear to you it wasn't me looking back. It had my face, but there was something beneath the skin pressing outward like hands behind a sheet of plastic, stretching my features into a grin I couldn't feel. And now I think maybe I never left that hospital, maybe I died with him, or maybe part of me did, and the rest is being worn like a costume by something that isn't supposed to be here. And everyone I try to tell thinks I'm grieving or losing my mind, and maybe I am, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong, because now I wake up with bruises on my arms shaped like fingerprints too long to be human, and last night I woke up to my own voice whispering in my ear from behind, but I was alone in the room, or at least I was supposed to be, and I turned on all the lights, but the shadows didn't retreat. They stayed where they were, watching, breathing, and I swear one of them moved across the floor toward me, slow and deliberate like it had all the time in the world, and it stopped at my feet and smiled, not with a mouth, but with a feeling, and now it's always here, sitting just out of view, behind doors I don't open and under the bed I don't check anymore. And I know it's waiting for something, not to kill me, not to scare me, but to finish what it started, to become me completely. And I think it's already started because I sometimes say things I don't remember knowing. I smell the dirt and rot even when I'm outside, and people look at me strange now, like they see something else behind my eyes, something hungry, and the truth is I don't know how much longer I have before it finishes crawling into my skin and closing the zipper behind itself. But if you're hearing this, if you're reading this, if you see someone who looks like me but doesn't quite move right, or speaks in a tone too flat, or smiles too long, please don't let it in. Don't talk to it. Don't believe it when it says it's me. Because I'm still here, somewhere deep down, screaming with no mouth in the dark. And I need you to remember me as I was before the shadows came alive and wore my face like a mask made of grief. Story 12. It began the day I moved into the old house at the edge of town, the one everyone warned me about, but no one would say why, just shaking their heads and muttering something about letting the past stay buried. But I didn't listen because I needed space and quiet, and the rent was dirt cheap. And the place was beautiful in a way that felt heavy: tall ceilings, wide stairs, the kind of wallpaper that looked like it had absorbed generations of whispers. But from the very first night, I knew something was wrong. Not from anything obvious like slamming doors or flickering lights, but because the house felt aware of me, like it had eyes hidden in the walls and breath that came in through the floorboards. And the first thing I noticed was that the clocks never kept time. They would slow down or stop altogether, but only when I was alone. And sometimes they'd spin rapidly as if the house was trying to rush me through something. And I started to lose time, small moments at first, like I'd be making coffee, and then suddenly it was cold in my hand and the sun had set. Or I'd blink and find myself standing in a different room than the one I was just in. And I kept telling myself I was just tired, that stress could do this, that my mind needed rest. But then came the scratching, soft at first, coming from inside the walls, always at night, like something with tiny claws dragging itself slowly closer to wherever I was trying to sleep. And I thought it was rats until I heard the whispering, my name spoken in a rasping, broken voice like someone choking on the syllables. And I searched the whole house, but there was never anyone there, never any source. And then the lights began to misbehave, not flickering but dimming slowly whenever I had a bad thought, as if the house was responding to my emotions, feeding off them. And I started dreaming of a man with no eyes standing at the end of my bed, not moving, just watching. And when I woke up the next morning, the floorboards where he stood were damp and smelled like iron. And I found footprints leading away that faded into nothing halfway down the stairs. And soon after that, the mirrors started to lie, not in obvious ways, not at first. But I'd catch them holding my reflection a second too long after I moved. Or I'd see myself blink before I actually did. And once, I swear I saw my reflection smile even though my face hadn't moved. And it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of something wearing me like a mask, something that didn't know how to be human but was trying anyway. And I started hearing voices under the floor at night, not just whispers anymore, but full conversations in a language I couldn't understand, low and rhythmic like a chant. And the air would grow thick with the smell of something burning, but I could never find the source. And every time I tried to leave the house for good, something would happen. My car wouldn't start. The roads would flood inexplicably, or I'd get so violently ill I couldn't stand. And when I called for help, the calls never went through, or if they did, the person on the other end would say strange things in my voice before hanging up, and people stopped visiting. Even my sister, who used to come every weekend, she came once, looked around the living room, turned pale, and left without saying a word. And when I called her later, she just said, "You're not alone in there," and hung up. And that night I heard her voice in the attic begging me to let her out, even though I knew she was at home across town. And the attic door was nailed shut, sealed with wax and old symbols that made my skin crawl to look at them. And when I finally got the courage to open it, I found nothing inside but an old rocking chair that rocked by itself and a mirror covered in black cloth. And I made the mistake of uncovering it. And what I saw wasn't me, but a version of myself with hollow eyes and a stitched mouth that trembled like it wanted to scream. And from that day forward, things got worse, like the house knew I had seen too much and wasn't going to let me go anymore. And I'd find myself waking up in the basement, not knowing how I got there, with dirt under my nails and old bruises on my arms in the shape of fingers too long to be human. And I stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped talking to anyone because I knew they wouldn't believe me, because the house had started to follow me outside, in reflections, in shadows, in dreams that bled into waking moments. And I'd hear footsteps behind me even when I was alone. and once I saw something crawl across my ceiling that moved like it didn't belong in this world, all limbs and faces and teeth, and I screamed until my voice broke, but no one came. No one ever came. And I realized that maybe I was never supposed to leave. Maybe I had been chosen by the house, fed to it by some cruel force I'll never understand, and now I hear things scratching inside me, not in the house anymore, but beneath my own skin. Something growing, something shifting, and sometimes I lose hours, entire nights, and wake up with dirt in my mouth and blood on my clothes and no memory of what happened. And the house is always clean when I return, cleaner than before. Like it's been tidied by unseen hands, and I don't know how long I have left, not as myself anyway, because the thing in the mirror is starting to look more real than I do, and sometimes it moves when I don't, and sometimes it laughs when I cry, and I know that one day soon I will look in the mirror, and it will be the only one looking back. Story 13. It started with the buzzing, low and constant like a distant swarm just beneath the skin of the world, something I noticed only at night at first. When everything was quiet and the lights were off and I was lying in bed alone trying not to remember the things I buried years ago. But then the buzzing got louder, clearer, more persistent, and I realized it wasn't in the walls or outside the house. It was in my ears, or maybe inside my skull, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more it started to speak, not in words exactly, not at first, just tones and pulses that somehow carried meaning, like signals from something ancient that had just learned how to whisper in human thoughts, and I thought maybe I was sick. Maybe I had tinnitus or a brain tumor or some psychological break from stress and lack of sleep, but the doctors found nothing, no physical cause, no mental illness they could name, and yet the buzzing continued, stronger each night, evolving into what I can only describe as a voice made of sound without form, and it knew me, it called me by name in moments when I was most vulnerable, when I was on the edge of sleep or standing in front of the mirror trying to convince myself I still looked human. And it reminded me of things I wanted to forget, things from my childhood I had locked away behind a wall I didn't even know I'd built, like the time I wandered into the woods behind my grandparents' house and saw something watching me from the trees. Something that didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move until I turned my back and felt its breath on my neck and ran without looking back. And like the night my mother told me in a sleep-deprived haze that something had been attached to me since birth. That I was born under a red sky in a thunderstorm with no thunder, and how I used to speak in voices that weren't mine as a toddler, words I shouldn't have known in languages no one could place, and she swore it stopped after the exorcism. The one she never told anyone else about, not even my father, and I laughed it off for most of my life until the buzzing started again, and now I wonder if she knew something I didn't, if she saw something back then that was never fully cast out, only made dormant. Something that waited in the corners of my life for the moment I would be weak enough to let it back in. And the buzzing wasn't just a voice anymore. It had a rhythm, a pattern like breathing, and I began to feel watched even in my own home. Reflections that didn't quite match me, shadows that moved when I was still, and the lights flickered not when storms came, but when I was angry, afraid, or grieving. And that's when the dreams began, not the kind you wake from, but the kind you fall deeper into, darker every time. A black staircase that winds forever downward, always ending in a door I'm not supposed to open but do anyway, and beyond it something waits, something enormous and beautiful and horrifying in a way that makes me weep in the dream, and scream in my sleep, and I wake with blood in my mouth and symbols carved into my arms I don't remember making, and my fingernails are black underneath as if I've been digging through something rotten, and the voice tells me it's almost time, that I'm almost ready, that I've been chosen, not randomly but by design, and that I was never supposed to be just one person, never just a man living in a house with too many memories. I was meant to be a vessel, a door, a passage, and I can feel it now. Something inside me shifting when I look into the eyes of strangers, something that makes them flinch or avert their gaze like they see something just behind me, and I've started to hear things through walls that no one else hears, scratching, breathing, weeping. And I can tell when someone nearby is about to die, not because of logic or signs, but because I smell it on them, that coppery sweetness like spoiled fruit left too long in the heat, And it's not just humans either, animals too, birds. Dropping from the sky when I pass under trees, dogs barking frantically as I walk by, cats hissing and bolting like they see something riding on my shoulders. And I've tried to record the voice, tried to prove it's real. But every time I play the audio back, it's just static layered over the sound of something breathing directly into the microphone. And one night, I listened to the tape backward and it spoke in my own voice, telling me things I've never said, confessing to things I've never done. Yet, and I know deep down that the voice is me now, or I am it. Or we were always the same thing, and the illusion of separation is just that, an illusion. And I've found old photographs of myself that I don't remember posing for, standing in places I've never been, and my eyes in those photos are wrong, too dark, too deep. And there's always something blurry behind me, something with too many limbs or none at all, and I've tried to run, to leave, to escape this fate or curse or possession or whatever it is. But wherever I go it follows, or more truthfully, it leads, because I'm not running from it. I'm running toward it, like a tide returning to its shore, like a seed becoming what it was meant to be all along. And I can't sleep anymore because I know what waits behind that door in my dreams is leaking into the real world. And the voice tells me soon the door will open and I won't be afraid because there will be no more me, only we. And every time I look into my own eyes now I see less and less of the person I thought I was and more of the thing I was always becoming. And soon there won't be anything left to fight, nothing left to save, only the final act of surrender when I let it speak through me completely. When I let the thing from the black staircase open my mouth and speak its name into the sky, the name that will break the clouds and still the birds and stop the hearts of everyone within a mile. And that's why I'm writing this, because maybe if someone reads this in time, they can burn this house, scatter the ashes, erase my name. Or maybe it's already too late and you're not reading this at all, but hearing it from my mouth and I'm already gone, already opened, already speaking in a voice that is no longer mine. Story 14. It began with the dreams. Not the kind that fade in the morning, but the kind that return each night more vivid than the last, like a sickness spreading through my thoughts until waking and sleeping became indistinguishable, and I stopped knowing which version of reality I was supposed to believe because every night I walked the same hallway that didn't exist in my house but felt more familiar than the rooms I actually lived in. A long, narrow corridor lined with photographs of people I'd never met, all staring at me with empty white eyes and bleeding smiles. And I'd walk for what felt like hours listening to a faint voice calling my name from the other end, a voice that was mine but wrong, like someone who had spent a lifetime trying to sound like me. And when I finally reached the door at the end and turned the knob, my hands would be wet with blood, and the door would open not into a room, but into a mirror showing me standing alone in a place that didn't reflect what was behind me, but instead something older and rotting and full of movement, like there were things crawling behind the glass that couldn't escape, but were learning how to. And I'd wake up with my bed sheets torn and my fingernails black and sometimes my mouth tasting of rust and rot. And it went on for weeks, then months, until time stopped behaving the way it should and clocks would reset themselves or run backward or freeze altogether whenever I stared too long at them, and I began seeing things in the corners of rooms, not quite shadows, but suggestions of something hunched and watching, something that vanished when I turned my head but left behind a smell like wet iron and burnt hair. And I stopped inviting people over because the few who came always left quickly, pale and disturbed, saying they felt like they were being watched from behind the walls. And then they stopped answering my calls altogether, and I started hearing whispers under the floor, tiny voices saying my name over and over again, and tones that shifted between begging and mocking, and sometimes I could feel breath on my skin when I sat still too long. And the lights began flickering, not when there were storms, but when I was afraid or angry or thinking about the dreams again, and the dreams never stopped, and the hallway never changed, except now the photos were starting to show people I recognized, old classmates, relatives I hadn't seen in years, strangers I'd passed once on the subway, and finally myself, with each new photo showing me in worse condition, sunken cheeks, bruised eyes, open mouth like I was screaming, but no sound was coming out. And when I looked at the photo closest to the door one night, I saw my face grinning with something sharp growing from my gums, and I knew it was trying to become me from the inside out. And when I covered the mirrors in my house, they stayed covered for a while until I'd wake up and the cloths were on the floor and the glass was smeared with words written backward in something brown that flaked when I touched it. And sometimes the words would say, "Let me out," or "You're not alone," or "I remember," and once it said my turn, and that night I didn't sleep because I could see the reflection in the mirror moving on its own, breathing in short, excited gasps like it was waiting for me to fall asleep so it could slip out. And I moved out of that house eventually, but nothing changed because I wasn't taking the haunting with me. I was the haunting. I was the place the thing had been. Hiding all this time, I was the doorway it needed. And I realized it too late because even in new places, clean places, with bright light and no history, the buzzing came back. The voices under the floor returned. The mirrors began twitching like water reflecting lightning even when the lights were steady, and strangers started calling me by names I'd never used, saying things like, "You're back," or "How did you escape?" or "Do you remember what you did?" And one even screamed when I looked him in the eyes and said, "No, no. It's still wearing your skin." And the dreams changed again, and the hallway started appearing even during the day when I'd blink too long or stare at a blank wall, and suddenly I'd be walking again past the photos, except now they were all me. Hundreds of versions of me, each more decayed and malformed than the last, and I couldn't turn around because I knew what was behind me. I always knew. And when I finally reached the mirror door, I didn't try to open it. I watched it open from the other side, and something stepped through that looked like me but taller, boneless, stretched thin like skin pulled over wire, smiling with all its teeth and whispering things I don't want to remember in my voice. And I woke up with my bedroom door wide open and the hallway dark and full of breathing, and I don't live alone anymore. Not really, because now the reflection sometimes moves when I don't, and sometimes I catch glimpses of myself doing things I don't remember doing, like leaving messages in places I didn't visit or carving symbols into my skin while I sleep. And people I knew have started disappearing quietly, without warning, like they've been erased. And their photos in my albums blur and fade until they're gone entirely, and I hear them in the walls now too, screaming not for help but in laughter, like they've seen what I'm becoming, and it's the funniest thing in the world. And the thing that wears my face in the mirror is smiling wider every day. And it tells me soon it won't need the glass anymore. Soon it will walk in the sun and speak in my voice, and wear my skin like a suit it was always meant to fill. And I wonder if it already has, and if the real me is still somewhere inside this body, watching through eyes that are no longer mine, screaming in a mind that doesn't echo anymore, just listens to the things crawling underneath and welcomes them like old friends. Because the worst part isn't that I'm losing myself, it's that it feels good. It feels like coming home. Story 15. It was never supposed to follow me. That's the part that's hardest to explain, because I didn't steal anything. I didn't desecrate a grave, or recite an incantation, or walk backwards through a haunted forest at midnight. I only went with a few friends to an abandoned church out in the hills behind the quarry, a place where moss grew like veins down the steeple and every window was broken, but the doors stayed shut no matter how hard you pulled unless you knocked first. And I didn't believe that part at first. Thought it was just a ghost story made to scare away drunk teenagers. But I knocked anyway, laughing like the rest, and the door opened, not loudly but slowly, like something was waiting behind it with patience older than bones. And I stepped inside and felt the air change, like it had weight, like the dust itself was watching, and the others laughed and kicked over pews, took photos of the collapsed altar and the mural of the bleeding angel with its eyes scratched out, and I stood in the middle aisle and stared at the place where the pulpit used to be, but I didn't see what the others did. I saw something else, a figure behind the altar, tall and still, so black it looked like a hole had been torn into the world. And I blinked and it was gone, and I told myself it was a shadow, a trick of the light, even when I heard footsteps behind me on the way out and turned to see no one there, even when I felt the cold breath on my neck before I crossed the threshold back outside, and everything smelled wrong for a second, like wet copper and spoiled milk, but I shook it off and laughed with the others, and we went home and drank and forgot about it, or at least they did. But that night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I kept hearing my name spoken in my own voice from somewhere just beyond the door. And the shadows in my room stretched a little too far, and the corners pulsed like lungs, and every time I closed my eyes I saw that hole-shaped figure standing where the altar had been. And in my dream it turned around, and it had my face, not a distorted version or a corpse copy, just exactly my face, only it didn't blink, and when it smiled, the room shook, and the walls split. And I woke with my hands pressed against the ceiling, my body floating above the bed like gravity had forgotten me. And when I fell, I felt something still inside me, something heavy and watching, and in the days that followed, I started seeing it in reflections, not mirrors exactly, but any surface that held still long enough, black screens, dark windows, water left undisturbed, and always just behind me, just far enough to deny. And people started noticing I was off, asking if I was okay, saying I didn't seem like myself. And I wanted to say that's because I'm not alone anymore. There's something with me, wearing me from the inside out. But I didn't, because how do you explain something like that without sounding insane, especially when it whispers to you at night and tells you not to speak? And sometimes I'd wake up in places I didn't fall asleep, in the basement, in the shed, once even out in the woods, barefoot and freezing with dirt under my nails and no memory of how I got there. And my phone would have photos on it I didn't take, blurry things, warped faces, stretched mouths open wider than they should go, and always that figure in the background, closer each time, until it wasn't in the background anymore, it was beside me, smiling. And I stopped sleeping altogether for a while, afraid of what I might do if I gave in, and I caught myself writing in languages I don't speak, carving symbols into the walls with my fingernails, humming songs I'd never heard but somehow knew the words to. And animals avoided me, birds flew into windows to escape my gaze, dogs whimpered when I got too close, and strangers started crossing the street to avoid me even when I said nothing. And I swear I could hear something breathing behind the walls of my apartment, no matter how many times I moved. And it got worse when I tried to leave, tried to fly across the country, but the flight was delayed for hours because of a mechanical issue, and then rerouted, and then canceled. And when I finally made it onto a plane days later, the man next to me had my eyes, exactly my eyes, and smiled without teeth and said nothing the entire flight, just stared ahead. And when we landed, he didn't get off the plane, and no one else seemed to notice him sitting there still after everyone had gone. And that night in the hotel, I woke up with my feet covered in mud and a strange taste in my mouth, like ash and bone, and the TV was on, though I hadn't turned it on. And it was showing static, except the static was moving like at a depth, like it was a tunnel and something was crawling out of it. And I turned it off, and the screen stayed black, but I saw my reflection blink out of sync with me. And I smashed the TV and went home and blocked every door and every window and blocked the mirrors with towels, but it wasn't enough, because it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside now, behind my eyes, beneath my skin, and my teeth. And sometimes when I cough, there's something in it. Something black and wriggling that dies before I can catch it. And my dreams are memories I don't recognize, of rituals and fires and ancient voices calling from underground chambers that smell of blood and oil. And I think I'm not the first. I think the church wasn't just abandoned, it was sealed, and we broke the seal, and it attached itself to me. Or maybe it's been following me longer, and that was just the moment it decided to wake up. And now I see things before they happen, just flashes, accidents, deaths, screams in places I've never been. And when I see those places in real life, the screams happen exactly like they did in my head. And I'm starting to think it's using me to feed itself, to reach through me. And every time I look in the mirror now, even just for a second, I see the thing I'm becoming, and it's not just copying me, it's replacing me, cell by cell, thought by thought. And I can't remember what it felt like to be alone in my own mind, because it's always there, humming, whispering, guiding my hand when I write or speak. And I don't think I've had a single thought in days that wasn't shaped by it. And I know that soon it won't need me anymore. Soon I'll just be a shell, and I'll look normal and talk normal, and go about my life. But it won't be me behind the eyes, and no one will know until it's too late. and maybe no one ever will, because maybe it wants to spread quietly, patiently, the way it found me, and maybe you reading this is enough for it to notice you. Maybe now it knows your name too. Story 16. It started with the sound, just a low clicking at first, like the tongue of someone hiding under the bed or behind the closet door, rhythmic and patient, always in the same 3-beat pattern, always louder when I was alone and quiet when someone else entered the room. And I thought maybe it was a pipe or an old house creaking, except it followed me to new apartments and new cities, and even once to a hotel where the lights went out for exactly 3 minutes and came back on to show my suitcase open and my clothes soaked with water that smelled like rot and copper and something else, something wild. And when I asked the manager for the security footage, he told me the camera in my hallway had never worked, and he looked me in the eye and asked, not jokingly, not cruelly, "Are you sure you were alone in that room?" And I laughed, but my stomach dropped because I had been feeling watched every night for weeks. That creeping sensation like fingers brushing the back of my neck. That electric tickle that makes you turn suddenly even though nothing's there. Except sometimes there was something in the glass of dark windows, in reflections that twitched just a little too slowly or moved when I didn't. And I started leaving lights on, but they'd flicker, one by one, always in the same pattern. 3 short pulses, silence, then a long buzz, like Morse code from something that didn't speak but could still say my name. And I heard it one night while I was lying in bed pretending to sleep. My name, whispered from the air vent, and I waited until sunrise to move again. But even then the shadows been a little wrong, and my eyes stung like I'd been weeping all night without knowing. And I told myself I was tired, that I was stressed, that it was grief, or burnout, or something fixable, but deep down I knew. I'd known for years that something had followed me back from my uncle's funeral, from that quiet house in the woods where the mirrors were all covered and no one would explain why, where the attic door was nailed shut with rusted railroad spikes, and I heard something dragging its fingers across the ceiling all night long, where the family Bible had pages torn out and burned in a tin bucket still warm when I touched it, where the only photo in the house was turned face down on a dresser, and when I flipped it over I saw a face that looked like mine, but wrong, too long, with eyes too deep and no whites, just endless black where the pupil should be, and after. That night I started waking up at exactly 3:16 a.m. every morning with the sound of heavy breathing echoing through my apartment, like someone asleep at the foot of my bed. Story 16. It started with the sound, just a low clicking at first, like the tongue of someone hiding under the bed or behind the closet door, rhythmic and patient, always in the same 3-beat pattern, always louder when I was alone and quiet when someone else entered the room. And I thought maybe it was a pipe or an old house creaking, except it followed me to new apartments and new cities, and even once to a hotel where the lights went out for exactly 3 minutes and came back on to show my suitcase open and my clothes soaked with water that smelled like rot and copper and something else, something wild. And when I asked the manager for the security footage, he told me the camera in my hallway had never worked, and he looked me in the eye and asked, not jokingly, not cruelly, "Are you sure you were alone in that room?" And I laughed, but my stomach dropped because I had been feeling watched every night for weeks. That creeping sensation like fingers brushing the back of my neck. That electric tickle that makes you turn suddenly even though nothing's there. Except sometimes there was something in the glass of dark windows, in reflections that twitched just a little too slowly or moved when I didn't. And I started leaving lights on, but they'd flicker, one by one, always in the same pattern. 3 short pulses, silence, then a long buzz, like Morse code from something that didn't speak but could still say my name. And I heard it one night while I was lying in bed pretending to sleep. My name, whispered from the air vent, and I waited until sunrise to move again. But even then the shadows been a little wrong, and my eyes stung like I'd been weeping all night without knowing. And I told myself I was tired, that I was stressed, that it was grief, or burnout, or something fixable, but deep down I knew. I'd known for years that something had followed me back from my uncle's funeral, from that quiet house in the woods where the mirrors were all covered and no one would explain why, where the attic door was nailed shut with rusted railroad spikes, and I heard something dragging its fingers across the ceiling all night long, where the family Bible had pages torn out and burned in a tin bucket still warm when I touched it, where the only photo in the house was turned face down on a dresser, and when I flipped it over I saw a face that looked like mine, but wrong, too long, with eyes too deep and no whites, just endless black where the pupil should be, and after. That night I started waking up at exactly 3:16 a.m. every morning with the sound of heavy breathing echoing through my apartment, like someone asleep at the foot of my bed, and once I saw the mattress indent under weight I couldn't see, like knees slowly pressing downward, and I didn't move until dawn because I couldn't, my limbs frozen, my jaw locked tight, my mind screaming beneath a layer of cold silence that didn't belong to me. And sometimes now I see flashes of things, staircases that lead nowhere, doorways that open onto fields I've never walked but somehow remember, animals frozen in the woods staring at me like they recognize something wearing my skin. And my dreams are wrong now too, full of whispering teeth and stairwells that breathe and halls that loop forever while something lurches behind me but never quite catches up. And when I try to write it down, my handwriting changes, becomes something slanted and scratchy, full of symbols I can't translate but feel deeply in my bones, like old memories of things I was never meant to know. And I've stopped speaking to most people because I can see it in their eyes when they look at me, that flicker of fear, of distance, like I'm out of focus, like the thing inside me presses too close to the surface and distorts the world around it. And animals won't come near me, plants in my apartment will, even when I water them. My reflection sometimes opens its mouth before I do and holds the expression too long, like it's practicing being me. And I keep getting these emails from untraceable addresses. Story 17. It started the night I moved into the old house on Green Hollow Road, a place I found through a listing on a local site, cheap for its size, with tall trees lining the driveway and ivy climbing up the stone walls, the house itself looking like it had been untouched for decades. With its crooked windows and overgrown garden, the air smelling of damp wood and something I couldn't place, something older than the house itself. But I needed a fresh start, so I ignored the creeping feeling in the pit of my stomach and signed the papers, thinking the neighbors were just a little too friendly when they asked if I was sure I wanted to move in. But I reassured them that I wasn't scared of an old house. I liked character, I liked the quiet, I liked the distance. But that first night I didn't sleep, not because of the creaks of the house settling, not because of the wind rattling the windows. No, it was because of the whispering, the soft, almost imperceptible voices that seemed to come from the walls, from the floorboards, from somewhere deep beneath the house. And at first I told myself it was just the house. Old houses made noise. They breathed and groaned and whispered when the wind passed through cracks. But the whispers weren't random. No, they spoke my name, softly, over and over, like a chant. And each time it was closer. And when I finally pulled the blankets up over my head and tried to drown it out, it felt like something was crawling across my skin. Not a touch, not a brush, but a crawl, slow and deliberate, and I could feel it, could almost see it. But when I tore the covers off and turned on the light, nothing was there except the dark corners of my room, and for a while, I convinced myself that it was just my mind playing tricks, that I was adjusting to the house, that maybe the isolation was getting to me. But the voices didn't stop. They kept calling me, kept speaking to me in that low, rhythmic whisper, always when I was alone, always when I was most vulnerable. And one night I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed a flashlight and went down to the basement to find the source, to prove to myself that it was just the house, just old pipes or rats or something harmless. But as soon as I opened the door to the basement, the temperature dropped, the air became thick with something I couldn't breathe, and I felt a presence, something ancient and malevolent pressing in on me from all sides, and the flashlight flickered as I descended the stairs, casting strange shadows on the walls, shadows that twisted in ways that didn't make sense. And when I reached the bottom, I saw it, not a rat or a pipe or a shadow, but a door, a small, rusted door at the far end of the basement, one that I hadn't noticed before. And I knew, just knew, that whatever was behind that door was what had been calling me, what had been whispering my name. And against every instinct in my body, I moved toward it, hand shaking as I grabbed the doorknob, and when I turned it, The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, pitch-black hallway, and I stepped inside, the smell of rot and decay so strong I almost gagged. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. Something had a grip on me now, something that wouldn't let me go. And I moved deeper into the dark, the only sound the pounding of my own heart, the only light the faint beam of my flashlight which flickered like it was running out of power. But when I turned a corner, the beam landed on something I wasn't prepared for, a figure, a person, standing at the end of the hallway, but not a real person. No, this figure was wrong, impossibly tall, its limbs unnaturally long, its face twisted into a grin that was both too wide and too hollow, with eyes that were black as ink, like they could swallow the light. And for a moment, I stood frozen, staring into those eyes, feeling the darkness press in, feeling it crawl under my skin and into my mind. But then I turned and ran, not caring if I tripped or fell. Just running back up the stairs, back out of the basement, back into the safety of the house where I locked every door and slammed every window shut. But that wasn't enough. No, because the whispering didn't stop, it only grew louder. Like something was moving inside the walls, like it was scratching, scraping at the plaster, trying to break through, and the air in the house thickened, suffocating me, and I started seeing things, figures standing in the corners of rooms, shadows that moved when I wasn't looking, things that shouldn't have been there. And my mind started to unravel, but every time I tried to leave, to call someone for help, the phone lines went dead, the car wouldn't start, the doors wouldn't open, and I was trapped. Trapped in a house that was no longer just a house, but something else, something alive. And I realized too late that whatever had been calling me, whatever had been whispering my name, was here to stay, that it had followed me from the basement and into my very soul, and there was no escaping it now, no running, no hiding, just the slow, suffocating creep of it taking over. And every night it got worse, the whispers louder, the shadows darker, until one night, it was no longer just a whisper. No, it was a scream, a sound so loud it rattled my bones, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, as it filled every inch of the house, until I knew, without a doubt, that whatever had been waiting in the dark wasn't waiting anymore. It was inside me. And as I looked in the mirror that night, I saw it, saw that it had taken my face, that it was wearing me, and I didn't even recognize myself anymore, just a hollow, twisted thing wearing my skin. And as I reached out to touch the reflection, I felt it move, felt the thing inside me stir, and I knew then that I wasn't alone anymore. Not in this house, not in this body, not in this world, and whatever it was, whatever had come to claim me, was just getting started. Story 18. I didn't believe in ghosts, not at first, not before the house on Maple Street. The house I rented at a discount because the previous tenant had disappeared under strange circumstances, but the landlord was friendly, told me it was just an old house with a history, and I'd get used to the creaks and groans of the floorboards. And I guess I did. At first, when I moved in, the place was dark, too dark for my liking, but nothing to worry about, just a bit of dust, and the walls were covered in old wallpaper that had started to peel in the corners, and the windows wouldn't open, no matter how hard I tried. So I just left them closed. But there was a strange energy to the house, like it was always watching, always listening, and it never felt quite right. And the first night I stayed, I woke up in the middle of the night, gasping, like I'd been suffocated, but I was alone. The room was cold, so cold, colder than I'd ever felt in my life. And I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was just the old house settling, that it was just my imagination. But then I started hearing the footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing outside my bedroom door in the middle of the night. And I would get up, open the door, expecting to find someone, anyone, but the hallway was empty, always empty, and the footsteps would stop as soon as I opened the door, but they would always start again after I lay back down. And the whispers began after that, quiet at first, like a faint rustling of paper, but they grew louder every night, almost like a voice, but not a voice I recognized. And at first, I thought it was just the wind or the house, or maybe the neighbors being too loud. But then the whispers started calling my name, softly, over and over, always at the same time, always at midnight, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I decided to leave, packed up my things, but when I went to open the front door, it wouldn't budge, no matter how hard I pulled, and I thought maybe it was just stuck, but the door wouldn't open, and I tried every Story 18. I didn't believe in ghosts, not at first, not before the house on Maple Street. The house I rented at a discount because the previous tenant had disappeared under strange circumstances, but the landlord was friendly, told me it was just an old house with a history and I'd get used to the creaks and groans of the floorboards. And I guess I did. At first, when I moved in, the place was dark, too dark for my liking, but nothing to worry about, just a bit of dust, and the walls were covered in old wallpaper that had started to peel in the corners, and the windows wouldn't open, no matter how hard I tried. So I just left them closed. But there was a strange energy to the house, like it was always watching, always listening, and it never felt quite right. And the first night I stayed, I woke up in the middle of the night, gasping, like I'd been suffocated, but I was alone. The room was cold, so cold, colder than I'd ever felt in my life. And I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was just the old house settling, that it was just my imagination. But then I started hearing the footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing outside my bedroom door in the middle of the night. And I would get up, open the door, expecting to find someone, anyone, but the hallway was empty, always empty, and the footsteps would stop as soon as I opened the door, but they would always start again after I lay back down. And the whispers began after that, quiet at first, like a faint rustling of paper, but they grew louder every night, almost like a voice, but not a voice I recognized. And at first, I thought it was just the wind or the house, or maybe the neighbors being too loud. But then the whispers started calling my name, softly, over and over, always at the same time, always at midnight, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I decided to leave, packed up my things, but when I went to open the front door, it wouldn't budge, no matter how hard I pulled, and I thought maybe it was just stuck, but the door wouldn't open, and I tried every other door and window in the house, but they were all locked, sealed shut, and I started to panic. But then I heard something, a scratching, like nails on wood, coming from the attic, and it made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to go up there to find out what it was, and the stairs creaked beneath my feet as I climbed, each step feeling like it would break under my weight. And when I reached the attic door, it was cracked open just a little, and I felt a cold wind rush out from inside. But when I stepped in, the room was empty, nothing but old boxes and forgotten furniture covered in dust, and there was nothing to explain the scratching, nothing to explain the feeling that something was just out of sight, watching me, waiting. But when I turned to leave, that's when I saw it, the shadow in the corner of the room, dark, solid, impossibly still, and for a moment, I thought it was just a trick of the light. But then the shadow moved, not like a person, but like something else, something not meant for this world. And I ran out of that room so fast, almost tripping over my feet, and I made it down the stairs. But when I tried to open the door again, it was still locked, still sealed, and I felt trapped, like the house was holding me in, like it didn't want me to leave. And the whispers came again, louder this time, more insistent, and I tried to scream. But nothing came out. My throat was dry, my heart racing in my chest, and the air grew thick, suffocating, and I felt the walls closing in on me. But the door still wouldn't open, and the whispers turned into laughter, low and mocking, like someone was standing just behind me. And I spun around, but there was no one there, just the empty, dimly lit hallway. But I could feel. Story 19. I never believed in the supernatural until the night I moved into that house, the house on Edgewood Avenue, an old two-story home that had been empty for years, its wooden frame sagging under the weight of time, the garden overtaken by weeds, and the windows covered in dust and grime, the kind of place that looked like it had been forgotten by the world. And the price was ridiculously low, which should have been my first red flag. But I was desperate, My life had fallen apart, and I needed a fresh start, and so I signed the lease without hesitation, convinced that the house was simply old and quirky, and I could deal with the creaks in the floorboards and the odd sound of the wind in the trees outside, and the first few nights were normal enough. Except for the strange feeling that something was always just behind me, just out of view, like eyes watching me from the dark corners of the rooms. But I convinced myself it was nothing, just the newness of the place, a feeling that would pass once I got settled in. But then, on the fourth night, after a long day of unpacking, I lay down to sleep, and as I closed my eyes, I heard it, a soft rustling sound, like paper being moved, and at first, I thought it was just the house settling. But the sound continued, getting louder, more distinct, until I realized it was coming from the hallway outside my bedroom, and when I got up to check, the hallway was empty, just the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. But there was something wrong about it, something unsettling in the air, like the house was holding its breath, and as I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was hearing, I felt a cold draft brush against the back of my neck, and when I turned around, the door to the attic, which had been shut tight earlier, was now slightly ajar, and I didn't know why, but I felt an overwhelming urge to go up there, to see what was inside, and as I climbed the stairs to the attic, the air grew colder, thicker, and I felt the weight of the house pressing down on me, suffocating me, but I couldn't turn back, not now, not when something inside me was pushing me forward, and when I reached the attic door, I pushed it open and stepped inside, my flashlight flickering as I moved across the dust-covered floor, and I saw it then, in the far corner of the attic, a small wooden chest, its surface scratched and worn, and without thinking, I approached it, my heart pounding in my chest, and when I opened it, I found nothing but old, yellowed papers, brittle and torn, and just as I was about to close the chest and leave, I saw it, a photograph, faded and worn, but the image was clear, a family standing in front of the house, but they were different. Their faces twisted in strange ways, their smiles too wide, their eyes dark and hollow, and I dropped the photo in shock, but it landed face up, and that's when I saw it, the figure standing behind the family, a shadow, tall and thin, with long fingers that seemed to stretch toward them, and I froze, staring at the image, unable to look away, and then the whispers started, soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, but growing louder, closer, until they were right behind me, and I turned. But there was nothing there, just the dark, empty attic, and I rushed down the stairs, but when I reached the bottom, I heard the whispers again, louder now, echoing through the house, and I ran to the door, only to find it locked, the handle twisting in my hand like it was alive, and the whispers turned into something worse, something more insistent, like voices calling my name. But when I looked around, no one was there, and I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, and when I turned, I saw it, the figure from the photograph, standing in the hallway, its eyes dark and empty, its smile stretching impossibly wide, and I tried to scream, but no sound came out, just the crushing silence of the house, and the figure began to move toward me, its steps echoing in the stillness, and I backed away, stumbling, unable to tear my eyes away from its face, from the thing that was coming for me, and as it reached out with its long, twisted fingers, I felt a coldness like nothing I had ever known, like the air had turned to ice, and its touch burned, seared my skin, and I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in the grip of the house, and I felt something shift inside me. Like the air itself had changed, like the house was no longer just a house, it was something alive, something ancient and hungry, and I realized too late that it wasn't just the figure in front of me that was alive, it was the entire house, and it was feeding off my fear, feeding off my soul, and just as I thought I might lose myself completely, the house let go, and I collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. But when I opened my eyes, the figure was gone, and the house was silent, too silent, like it was waiting for me to make the next move, but I couldn't stay, I couldn't live there any longer, so I grabbed my things and ran. But when I tried to leave, I realized the door wouldn't open, The windows were sealed shut, and the whispers returned, louder now, all around me. And I knew then that I was trapped, not in the house, but inside it, a part of it. And I could never escape, never, because once the house takes you, it never lets go. And every night, the whispers call my name, and the figure waits just outside the door, always just out of sight. But it's there, and it always will be, because the house on Edgewood Avenue doesn't forget, and neither does the thing that lives inside it. Story 20. I had never believed in the supernatural, not even when I moved into that old house on the outskirts of town, a place that had been abandoned for years and was being rented out at an unbelievably low price. But I didn't question it. Needed the fresh start, I told myself, after losing my job, my friends, my sense of purpose. The house, a 2-story Victorian with sagging windows and a garden that had long since been overtaken by weeds, seemed perfect for someone like me who wanted isolation, peace. A place to finally settle down, to clear my mind. So I took it without a second thought, signed the lease, and moved in alone. But from the very first night, something felt off. There was a weight to the silence that hung in the air, like something unseen was watching me, waiting. And I shrugged it off, thinking it was just nerves, just the strange newness of my surroundings. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the first sound, a faint scuttling from the walls, so light that I thought I imagined it. But when I listened harder, I realized it wasn't the house settling, it was something alive, something moving, and I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just mice or the wind in the rafters, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. And over the next few days, the sounds became more pronounced, more persistent, like scratching from the attic, a constant thumping, the occasional faint whisper, and I grew used to it, forced myself to ignore it, because I had to. I didn't want to believe that something was really there, something that wasn't supposed to be. But then one night, the noise woke me in the middle of the night, and I lay there listening, paralyzed, as the whispering grew louder, the unmistakable sound of a voice speaking just beyond the walls. Not a voice I recognized, not one I could understand, but the tone, it felt cold, malicious. Story 20. I had never believed in the supernatural, not even when I moved into that old house on the outskirts of town, a place that had been abandoned for years and was being rented out at an unbelievably low price. But I didn't question it. Needed the fresh start, I told myself, after losing my job, my friends, my sense of purpose. The house, a 2-story Victorian with sagging windows and a garden that had long since been overtaken by weeds, seemed perfect for someone like me who wanted isolation, peace. A place to finally settle down, to clear my mind. So I took it without a second thought, signed the lease, and moved in alone. But from the very first night, something felt off. There was a weight to the silence that hung in the air, like something unseen was watching me, waiting. And I shrugged it off, thinking it was just nerves, just the strange newness of my surroundings. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the first sound, a faint scuttling from the walls, so light that I thought I imagined it. But when I listened harder, I realized it wasn't the house settling, it was something alive, something moving, and I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just mice or the wind in the rafters, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. And over the next few days, the sounds became more pronounced, more persistent, like scratching from the attic, a constant thumping, the occasional faint whisper, and I grew used to it, forced myself to ignore it, because I had to. I didn't want to believe that something was really there, something that wasn't supposed to be. But then one night, the noise woke me in the middle of the night, and I lay there listening, paralyzed, as the whispering grew louder, the unmistakable sound of a voice speaking just beyond the walls. Not a voice I recognized, not one I could understand, but the tone, it felt cold, malicious, and I couldn't take it anymore. So I got up, heart racing, and I went up to the attic, armed with nothing but a flashlight. My steps tentative, but when I opened the door to the attic, the air felt wrong, the temperature dropped, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, and the light flickered, revealing only dust and old furniture. But then I saw something in the corner, something I hadn't noticed before, a wooden chest covered in cobwebs, and I had no reason to open it, no real desire to. But the urge was there, strong, like something was compelling me, and I lifted the lid, my breath catching in my throat as I saw. What was inside? Nothing but old, yellowed papers and some tattered books. But as I dug through them, something slid out from under the pages, a photo, so faded and worn it was barely recognizable, but I could make out the image of a family, smiling, standing in front of the house, and at first, I thought it was just some random old photograph, but then I saw something strange behind them. Standing in the shadows was a figure, too tall, too thin, its features distorted, its eyes hollow, its mouth stretched into a grin, and as I stared at it, the room grew colder still, and that's when I heard it. Whispers, low and guttural, the same voice that had been echoing in the walls, now coming from behind me, and I turned around, heart hammering. But the attic was empty, just the shadows and the silence, and I slammed the chest shut and rushed downstairs, but the house was not the same anymore. The air felt thick, suffocating, and every room I entered seemed to grow darker, colder, as if the house itself was alive, pressing in on me. And when I went to the front door to leave, I found it locked, the handle cold, like ice, and I tried every other door and window, but they were all sealed shut. And that's when the whispers began again, louder this time. Almost like voices, not just one, but many, all around me, surrounding me, and the temperature dropped even further, the cold crawling under my skin, and I heard the faintest sound of footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, echoing through the hallway. But when I turned, there was nothing there, only the emptiness, and I ran to the kitchen, thinking I could break a window, escape. But the room was even darker now, shadows moving along the walls like living things, and I could feel someone watching me, and just as I turned to leave, I saw it, just a glimpse at first, a shadow at the edge of my vision, too tall, too thin. Story 21. It wasn't until the day I moved into the old house on Hawthorne Street that I understood what fear truly felt like. A cold, suffocating fear that takes root in your bones and doesn't let go. No matter how hard you try to escape, the house was old, nearly a century old, and when I first saw it, I was taken aback by how large it was, with its sprawling porch, faded blue paint that had long since lost its vibrancy, and overgrown ivy creeping up the walls like fingers stretching toward the sky. The real estate agent had been eager to show it to me, almost too eager, telling me about its charm, its potential, and how it was such a steal for the price, and at the time, I was looking for a fresh start after a rough breakup and a series of failed relationships. I needed somewhere to retreat to, somewhere quiet, and the house, despite its eerie appearance, seemed perfect. So I signed the lease without thinking twice, and that first night, I was excited, even though something about the house felt off, as if it had its own heartbeat, a pulse I could almost feel vibrating through the floors, but I shrugged it off as my imagination, and I set up my things, unpacked my bags, and decided to take a walk around the neighborhood before nightfall. The streets were empty, quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind, and when I returned, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the porch, and I walked inside, locking the door behind me, and it wasn't until I sat down to eat my dinner that I noticed the first strange thing, a low, constant tapping sound, as though something was gently knocking on the walls. I froze, listening, but the sound stopped just as suddenly as it had started, and I thought perhaps it was just the house settling. Old houses do that, right? But that night, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, the tapping returned, and this time it was louder, more deliberate, and I found myself wide awake, staring into the darkness, my heart racing, and I told myself to calm down, to breathe, that it was nothing, just the wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, and I quickly turned on the light, the room illuminated in harsh white, but there was nothing there, nothing but the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and I sighed in relief, telling myself I was being ridiculous, but the feeling wouldn't go away, the sense that the house itself was watching, waiting for something, and the next few days felt just as strange. Things would move around when I wasn't looking. Doors would creak open on their own, and I'd hear faint whispers, too soft to make out, but they always seemed to come from somewhere just behind me when I was alone, and I tried to rationalize it, tell myself it was just the wind, or perhaps the old pipes groaning, but it wasn't. And one night, while I was doing laundry in the basement, I felt it, the unmistakable feeling of being watched, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and when I turned to leave, I saw it, just a glimpse, a shadow darting across the far corner of the basement, and I ran up the stairs, my pulse pounding in my ears, and from that moment, I couldn't shake the sense that something was in the house with me, that it wasn't just a house, it was something else, something alive, and I knew I wasn't alone, but no matter what I did, I couldn't get rid of the feeling, so I tried to ignore it, to push through the anxiety, but then it got worse, so much worse. The tapping turned into scratching, like claws dragging across the walls at night, and I could hear it, feel it. Even when I had the lights on, I couldn't escape it, and it would always come at night, when everything was quiet, and I couldn't take it anymore. So one evening, I decided to investigate. I had to know what was causing the noises, and when I went into the attic, the air was thick with dust, the beams creaking under my feet, and I saw it, an old chest in the corner, and without thinking, I opened it, and inside were old newspapers, faded photographs, and a journal, and as I flipped through the journal, the pages were covered in strange symbols, in a language I didn't recognize, and then I saw the entry, dated 1927, detailing the life of a woman named Margaret who had once lived in the house, and she wrote about strange occurrences, voices whispering her name, shadows moving when no one was there, and then, in the final entry, the last words she wrote were, "It's in the walls, it's never leaving," and I slammed the journal shut, my heart pounding, and as I backed away from the chest, I heard it, the sound of something scratching against the walls, louder now, and I turned to run. But when I reached the stairs, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping me inside, and I felt my pulse quicken as I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the darkness above me, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, and then I saw it, in the doorway, a figure, pale and gaunt, its eyes hollow, its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, and I couldn't scream, couldn't do anything as it stepped closer, its eyes fixed on me, and I stumbled backward, feeling the cold air closing in around me, but I couldn't escape, not this time, not when the house itself seemed to be pulling me in, and the last thing I remember before the darkness swallowed me whole was hearing the whisper, soft and chilling, "You're mine now." And when I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the attic, the chest still open beside me, and I tried to stand, but I couldn't, the weight of the house pressing down on me, and when I looked around, I saw something in the corner of my vision, the faintest shadow, just beyond my reach, and I knew then that I was never going to leave, that the house had claimed me, just as it had claimed Margaret, and I would be part of it forever. And every time I try to move away, I hear the scratching, the whispers, the footsteps, and I realize I can never escape. I'm trapped here, in this house, just like the others before me, and all I can do is wait for the next person to come, to fall into the same trap, to be claimed by the house. And I wonder how long it will take before they're lost like me, just another name on a page, just another soul to feed the house. And I've come to understand that it doesn't matter if I leave, because it's already in me, it's inside me, and it will never let go. Story 22. I never believed in ghosts, never believed in the supernatural, but when I moved into that decrepit house on Oak Hollow Road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the very first night, a strange, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow every sound, every step I took. And when I arrived, I was thrilled. It was a fresh start, a chance to escape the memories of my broken life in the city, my recent divorce, and the crushing weight of failed dreams that hung over me. Like a storm cloud, the house had been empty for years, according to the realtor, and the rent was shockingly low, too good to pass up. So I took it, thinking it was the perfect place for a quiet life, a new chapter, and though the house was old and dilapidated, with rotting floorboards and windows that rattled in the wind, I was excited to be free of the noise and chaos that defined my existence before. There were other homes around it, but this one, isolated on its own, sat at the edge of a forest, surrounded by tall, thick trees that seemed to stretch on forever, and as I settled in, unpacked my things, and began to make it feel like home, I told myself the creaks of the house were just its age, its settling. The rustling of the trees outside was just the wind, but that night, as I lay in bed, I heard something that didn't belong, a soft tapping sound, coming from the walls, not like the usual settling noises, but rhythmic, deliberate, as though something was trying to communicate. I froze, my heart began to race, but I convinced myself it was just the pipes, or maybe rats in the walls, anything to explain it away, and the tapping stopped by morning, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong, that I was being watched, and then it began again. Every night, tapping in the walls, louder now, sometimes in the floorboards, sometimes in the ceiling, but it was always there, just beneath the surface, a constant reminder that I wasn't alone, and I tried to ignore it, tried to push it out of my mind, but the unease grew, and one night, I was sitting in the living room, reading, when I heard the sound again, only this time it was closer, coming from behind me, from the corner of the room, and I turned, my pulse quickening, but nothing was there, just shadows stretching across the walls, and I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the feeling lingered, that unmistakable sensation of being watched, and then it got worse. The tapping turned into scratching, like claws dragging across the wood, and I could hear it even when the house was silent, when the wind wasn't blowing and the trees outside were still, and sometimes, when I was in the kitchen or the bathroom, I'd hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the empty house, and when I turned around, there was nothing there, no one, just the silence pressing in on me. And then, one night, when I was in bed, I felt it, something cold brushing against my neck, a chill that made my skin crawl, and when I looked, there was nothing, but I could feel it, that presence hovering just out of sight, and I couldn't take it anymore. So I decided to investigate. I had to know what was causing the sounds, what was making me feel like I was losing my mind, and I went into the attic, the last place I hadn't dared to go, and when I climbed the stairs, the air grew thick, musty, as if something was suffocating the room, and when I opened the attic door, I found it full of old furniture, broken boxes, and forgotten things, but it was the chest in the corner that caught my eye, a large, wooden thing, covered in dust and cobwebs, and my heart raced, my curiosity getting the better of me as I approached it, and when I opened the lid, I found old photographs, black and white, faded with age, and as I flipped through them, I saw images of people I didn't recognize, families, children, smiling faces. But then, in the back of the pile, I found something else, a letter, yellowed with age, and I read it, hands trembling, the writing faded but still legible, and it spoke of a woman named Eliza, who had lived in the house years before, someone who had written about strange occurrences, whispers in the night, shadows that moved on their own, and then, towards the end, the letter took a darker turn, describing how Eliza believed the house had a mind of its own, that it was alive, feeding on the fear of those who lived within it. And the final line read, "It's here with me, watching me, and it won't let me leave." And I slammed the letter back into the chest, my mind racing, but just as I went to shut the lid, I heard it, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the corner of the attic. But when I turned to look, there was no one, and the air grew colder, the temperature dropping suddenly, and I ran out of the attic, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and I couldn't escape the feeling, the crushing certainty that something was in the house with me, something that wasn't human, and from that moment, things only got worse. The noises became more frequent, more aggressive, like someone was moving around in the walls, the ceilings, pacing, always watching, and one night, I woke to the sound of someone whispering my name, soft at first, then louder, clearer, and when I turned to look, I saw it, standing at the foot of my bed, a figure, tall and thin, its face pale, hollowed, eyes black as pitch, staring at me with a smile that twisted inhumanly wide, and I froze, unable to move, unable to scream, as it reached out towards me, its fingers long and gnarled, and I could feel the cold emanating from it. the icy grip of terror seizing my chest, but then it vanished, just like that, leaving only the bitter chill behind, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay. I couldn't live like this, but I couldn't leave either, because every time I tried, I would hear the footsteps, the whispers, and something in the back of. My mind told me I was trapped inside the house, and when I finally did manage to leave, to escape, I thought I was free, but every time I closed my eyes, I could hear it, the tapping, the scratching, the whispers calling my name, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw it, its face, the same hollow eyes, the same twisted smile, staring back at me, and I realized then that it wasn't the house that haunted me, it was something far worse, something that had followed me, something that would never let me go, and no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, it was always there, just behind me, waiting, and I know now that I will never be free, because it is in me, it is part of me, and it will never stop following me, never stop watching me, never stop whispering my name, until the day it finally takes me completely, and I'll never escape, not in this life, not in the next, because I'm already lost. Story 23. It all started when I moved into that house on Sycamore Drive. I was desperate for a new start after a messy breakup and a series of bad choices that led me to feel isolated and lost in my life. And when I saw the house, I thought it would be the perfect escape. A small, rundown 2-story house with a yard that had long ago surrendered to weeds and neglect. The windows were dirty, and the wood siding was chipped, but it felt right in a way I couldn't explain. It was affordable. The realtor was eager to show it to me, as if there was something I didn't know, some hidden charm about it. But I didn't care. I was tired of living in the city, tired of being surrounded by people who reminded me of my failures, so I signed the lease without hesitation, telling myself it was just a house, just wood and nails and brick, nothing more, nothing less. But the moment I stepped inside, the air felt different, thick, heavy, like it was soaked in something old, something that didn't want to be. Disturbed, the floors creaked under my weight, and there was a faint smell of something rotting, though I couldn't pinpoint where it came from, and I told myself it was just the age of the place, the years of dust and decay building up in the corners. I unpacked my things, set up my furniture, and tried to settle in, though the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I wasn't alone. But I ignored it. People like me don't get haunted, I thought. Not unless they believe in ghosts, and I didn't, not really, until the first night I spent in that house, alone in the darkness. The silence was deafening, and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of the past, the breakup, the endless cycle of mistakes I couldn't seem to escape. When I heard it, a soft scraping noise, like nails against wood, coming from the floor below me, I told myself it was the house settling. It was old. It made sounds like that, but it didn't stop. And when I lay still, straining my ears, the noise grew louder, more deliberate, like something or someone was moving around in the room beneath me, pacing. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I was too scared to get up, to go check. So I pulled the covers over my head and tried to convince myself that I was imagining it, that it was just the wind. Story 23. It all started when I moved into that house on Sycamore Drive. I was desperate for a new start after a messy breakup and a series of bad choices that led me to feel isolated and lost in my life. And when I saw the house, I thought it would be the perfect escape. A small, rundown 2-story house with a yard that had long ago surrendered to weeds and neglect. The windows were dirty, and the wood siding was chipped, but it felt right in a way I couldn't explain. It was affordable. The realtor was eager to show it to me, as if there was something I didn't know, some hidden charm about it. But I didn't care. I was tired of living in the city, tired of being surrounded by people who reminded me of my failures, so I signed the lease without hesitation, telling myself it was just a house, just wood and nails and brick, nothing more, nothing less. But the moment I stepped inside, the air felt different, thick, heavy, like it was soaked in something old, something that didn't want to be. Disturbed, the floors creaked under my weight, and there was a faint smell of something rotting, though I couldn't pinpoint where it came from, and I told myself it was just the age of the place, the years of dust and decay building up in the corners. I unpacked my things, set up my furniture, and tried to settle in, though the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I wasn't alone. But I ignored it. People like me don't get haunted, I thought. Not unless they believe in ghosts, and I didn't, not really, until the first night I spent in that house, alone in the darkness. The silence was deafening, and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of the past, the breakup, the endless cycle of mistakes I couldn't seem to escape. When I heard it, a soft scraping noise, like nails against wood, coming from the floor below me, I told myself it was the house settling. It was old. It made sounds like that, but it didn't stop. And when I lay still, straining my ears, the noise grew louder, more deliberate, like something or someone was moving around in the room beneath me, pacing. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I was too scared to get up, to go check. So I pulled the covers over my head and tried to convince myself that I was imagining it, that it was just the wind or the house's old pipes. But the noise didn't stop, and as the hours passed, it seemed to get closer, moving from one room to another, as if whatever it was exploring the house, looking for something. And the next morning, when the light of day finally filled the house, I laughed at myself for being so paranoid, for letting my mind wander. But deep down, I knew something had been wrong. Something had stirred the air, changed the temperature in that room. And as the days went by, the feeling of being watched grew, a constant presence that hovered just behind me, just out of sight. I thought I saw shadows move when I wasn't looking, and once, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway, just for a split second. But when I blinked, it was gone. I tried to brush it off as a trick of the light, but then the noises started again, this time in the walls. And the floorboards groaned as if someone heavy was walking through them, but no one was there. I started to feel trapped, as though the house was slowly swallowing me, and I couldn't escape. The house was old, sure, but it wasn't supposed to be this, alive. And one night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of soft whispers, so faint I couldn't understand the words. But the tone was unmistakable. It was beckoning, coaxing, like a voice I recognized, like a voice I'd heard before. And I jumped out of bed, my heart hammering in my chest. The whispering stopped immediately, but the air grew heavier, colder, and I saw it then. Through the dim moonlight coming from the window, there was a figure standing at the foot of my bed, tall, impossibly tall, its body shrouded in shadow, its face just out of reach of the light. And I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at it, feeling its presence like a weight pressing against my chest. And then it whispered my story 24. I moved into the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, desperate to escape the chaos that had consumed my life for the past few years. My marriage had crumbled. My job was suffocating me. And the people I had surrounded myself with had all begun to feel like ghosts in my life, draining my energy, pulling me into a space I couldn't escape. And when I found the house, I thought it would be my salvation, a fresh start, a place where I could breathe again. It was far enough from everything that I wouldn't have to see the familiar faces that reminded me of what I had lost. It sat on a small plot of land surrounded by trees, so thick and tall that they blocked out much of the sky. And the house itself was ancient, weathered, its paint peeling and the wood creaking under the weight of time, but it had a charm about it, something that made me feel like I could put down roots again. I signed the papers with a sense of relief, thinking I was making the right choice, the right move. And on the first night, when I sat in the empty house, surrounded by boxes of things I hadn't unpacked yet, I realized something strange. There was no sound, not the usual hum of the city or the distant traffic, just a thick, suffocating silence. I told myself it was the isolation, the quiet of being far from the hustle and bustle, but it felt wrong, as though the silence was something more, something darker. And when Story 24. I moved into the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, desperate to escape the chaos that had consumed my life for the past few years. My marriage had crumbled. My job was suffocating me. And the people I had surrounded myself with had all begun to feel like ghosts in my life, draining my energy, pulling me into a space I couldn't escape. And when I found the house, I thought it would be my salvation, a fresh start, a place where I could breathe again. It was far enough from everything that I wouldn't have to see the familiar faces that reminded me of what I had lost. It sat on a small plot of land surrounded by trees, so thick and tall that they blocked out much of the sky, and the house itself was ancient, weathered, its paint peeling and the wood creaking under the weight of time, but it had a charm about it, something that made me feel like I could put down roots again. I signed the papers with a sense of relief, thinking I was making the right choice, the right move, and on the first night, when I sat in the empty house, surrounded by boxes of things I hadn't unpacked yet, I realized something strange. There was no sound, not the usual hum of the city or the distant traffic, just a thick, suffocating silence. I told myself it was the isolation, the quiet of being far from the hustle and bustle, but it felt wrong, as though the silence was something more, something darker, and when I lay in bed that night, I thought I heard something, just a rustling sound, faint, like someone moving around in the house, but I was alone, and the house was supposed to be empty. I convinced myself it was the house settling, the wind outside, but then it came again, a soft whisper, too soft for me to make out the words. And the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I got out of bed, turned on the lights, but when I checked the rooms, there was nothing, and I laughed nervously, chalking it up to being tired or imagining things. But the feeling didn't go away, it lingered. That oppressive sense of being watched, like someone was just out of view. And the next night, the whispers came again. Only this time, they were louder, clearer, and I could swear they were calling my name. Not a voice I recognized, but one that seemed too familiar, too close. And I froze, unable to move, unable to speak, as if the air had thickened, become suffocating. And when I finally gathered the courage to leave my room, I couldn't find anything. No signs, no footprints, no broken windows. Nothing that would explain what I had heard. But I knew then that something was in the house with me, something that shouldn't have been there. And as the days went on, the strange occurrences began to escalate. The whispers turned into voices, and I started hearing footsteps, heavy, deliberate, as if someone was walking around, pacing the hallways when I wasn't looking. But when I went to check, there was never anyone there, just empty rooms, empty walls, and the feeling that the house itself was alive, breathing, watching. And I thought about leaving. I thought about packing up and running, but I couldn't. Something kept me rooted to that place, like it was pulling me in, like I was trapped. And then one night, the air grew so cold that I could see my breath in the dim light of the hallway, and I heard a door creak open from down the hall. I rushed toward it, but when I got to the room, the door slammed shut on its own, and I had to force it open. But when I stepped inside, the room was empty, just like the rest, except for the old rocking chair in the corner, which had started moving on its own, slowly rocking back and forth. And as I approached it, I heard a low growl, deep and guttural, like it was coming from the very walls themselves. And I froze, unable to move, but somehow I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it, the presence, the thing that had been watching me. And then I saw it, standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark, its form shifting, as if made of shadows and smoke. And I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. And then it spoke, not in a voice, but in my mind, a cold, rasping whisper that chilled me to my core. You shouldn't have come here. And I felt my heart stop, my legs give out beneath me, and I collapsed to the floor, unable to tear my eyes away from the thing that had appeared before me, its eyes never leaving mine. And as I tried to pull myself to my feet, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the room with it. And I heard its voice again, "You're not leaving, not ever." And I realized, in that moment, that I had made a terrible mistake, that the house had chosen me, that I was part of it now. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how many times I tried to escape, it would always follow me, because it wasn't just the house that had claimed me, it was something older, something far more dangerous. In the wall. Story 25. It started the day I found the house, tucked away on the outskirts of town. a dilapidated two-story structure that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Its windows covered in layers of grime, and the door crooked on its hinges. I wasn't expecting to buy a house. I was just looking for a change, an escape. My life was falling apart. I had just gotten out of a toxic relationship. My job had become a dead end, and I was drowning in debt. When I found this place, I thought it would be the perfect solution. I didn't care about the cracks in the foundation or the peeling paint. I just wanted somewhere to disappear, to escape the weight of my past. And so, I signed the papers without a second thought. But the first night in that house, I knew something was wrong. The air felt thick, heavy, as though it was soaked with something old, something forgotten. I tried to ignore it, but as I lay in bed that first night, I heard it. A soft creaking sound coming from somewhere in the house, like footsteps on the old wooden floors. But when I checked, there was no one there. I thought I was just being paranoid, that I was imagining things, but the noises didn't stop. They grew louder over the next few days, subtle at first. The sound of something dragging itself across the floor, of something or someone moving through the house when I wasn't looking, but there was no one, just me, alone. And then the whispers started, soft at first, too quiet to make out, but I could hear them, just behind me, like voices coming from the walls themselves. I convinced myself it was the house settling, the wind, or maybe even the pipes, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that there was something in the house with me, watching me, waiting for something. And one night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again, clearer this time, a voice, low and rasping, like someone was speaking right next to me. And when I turned to look, there was no one there, but the air was so cold, I could see my breath, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker, deeper. And then I saw it, just for a moment, in the mirror across from my bed. There was something standing behind me, a figure, tall and thin, its face obscured by shadow. And when I blinked, it was gone, vanished, but the chill remained, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was paralyzed, trapped in that room. And when the sun finally rose, I told myself, it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I told myself I was just tired, but the house was changing. The noises grew more frequent, the whispers louder, more distinct, until one night, I woke to find the lights flickering on and off in the hallway. And when I stepped out of my room to investigate, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a door at the end of the hallway that had never been there before. It wasn't in the blueprints, it wasn't in the house when I first moved in, but there it was, a door made of dark, rotting wood, its surface covered in strange, twisted symbols I couldn't recognize. And before I could reach out and touch it, I heard the whispers again. Only this time, they weren't coming from the walls. They were coming from behind the door, loud and urgent, calling my name. And against every instinct in my body, I opened it. The door creaked open with a sound that was too loud, too final. And when I stepped inside, I found myself in a room I hadn't seen before, one that didn't exist or shouldn't exist. The walls were covered in strange markings. The floor was sticky with something that felt wrong. And in the center of the room was an old rocking chair, rocking slowly back and forth as if someone had just gotten up. I stepped closer to it, and that's when I saw it. A small, weathered box sitting on the floor, covered in dust and cobwebs. My hand reached out to it before I could stop myself, as if the box was calling to me. And as soon as my fingers brushed against it, I felt it. A sharp, burning pain in my chest, like I was being pulled into something deep and dark. And the moment I touched the box, I heard it. The voice, clearer now, not in whispers, but in a scream, a high-pitched, agonizing scream. And it was coming from the box. I slammed it shut, but the scream didn't stop. It was inside my head now, clawing at my mind, and I stumbled backward, knocking over the rocking chair. And that's when I saw it, standing in the corner of the room. Something or someone. I couldn't tell. Its shape was too twisted, too wrong. Its eyes were hollow pits of darkness, its body made of shadows that shifted and moved like liquid, and it smiled at me, a wide, ghastly grin that stretched across its face, and I tried to scream, but no sound came out, and then it spoke, its voice like ice, like it was carved into my very soul. You shouldn't have opened it. And before I could even react, it lunged at me, its shadowy arms reaching out, and I felt them wrap around me, cold and suffocating, pulling me down into the darkness, into the thing that had been waiting for me all along. And I couldn't breathe, couldn't see, and everything went black, and when I woke up, I was back in my bed. But something had changed. The house felt different, the air heavier, thicker, and I realized with a cold, sinking feeling in my chest that I hadn't escaped it. I hadn't escaped the house. I hadn't escaped the thing inside it. And it was still here, still watching me, waiting for me to open that door again. And every night since, I can hear it, the whispers, the soft scraping of the box. And I know now that the house isn't just a house. It's a prison, and I'm its prisoner, and there's no escape. Not anymore. Because once you open that door, once you touch that box, it never lets you go. And no matter how far you run, it always follows, always waiting, always watching. And I don't know if I'll make it out alive, but I know that something dark is waiting for me. And soon, it will come for me again, and I will never be free of it. Story 26. I never believed in haunted places or cursed objects or any of that supernatural nonsense people whisper about until I found the VHS tape in the attic of my childhood home. A place I hadn't returned to in over 20 years and only did so now because my father died alone in that house and I was the only one left to handle the estate. Walking through the halls was like stepping back into a memory that had gone sour. The wallpaper was curling at the edges, the air was stale, and the silence was so thick it pressed against my skin like a second atmosphere, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from behind the doors that no longer opened right, especially the attic, which I had avoided my whole life after what happened when I was 10. When I saw a shadow crawl across the ceiling and vanish behind the boxes while my dad screamed at nothing in the corner. But I had to go up now, to clean out the junk, and that's when I found it, buried in a moldy box labeled "Do Not Open," was a black unmarked VHS tape wrapped in cloth, and even though every instinct told me to leave it alone, I brought it downstairs and set up my dad's old TV with the Bill and player. A beast of a machine that groaned when I fed the tape into its mouth like it remembered what it had seen before, and the screen crackled to life, not with static, but with a dim image of a hallway that looked exactly like the one I had just walked through to get to the living room. And at first I thought it was a home movie, something my dad filmed when he still had his mind. But then the timestamp flickered for 13 a.m., today's date, and I realized the tape was showing me a live feed of my house from angles no camera could possibly capture, like from inside the walls or from behind the mirrors, and my skin prickled when I saw something move, just a blur at the edge of the screen, too fast to be a person but too solid to be a trick of the light, and I reached for the power button but the remote didn't work. The buttons on the TV didn't respond, and the image kept playing, room after room, all of them dark, all of them empty, until the feed showed the attic again, and I saw a figure standing where I had found the tape. Tall and thin and wrapped in shadow like smoke given shape, and though it didn't have a face, I knew it was looking at me. And then the image changed again, this time showing the living room, my living room, with me sitting on the couch staring at the screen, and behind me. In the image, the shadow stood only a few feet away, its long fingers outstretched as if about to touch the back of my head. And I spun around, but nothing was there, just air, empty and cold. But when I looked back at the screen, the figure was now standing directly behind me, staring into the camera that didn't exist, and I felt breath on my neck, cold and fetid like something left to rot in the dark. And I ran, left the house, slept in my car until morning. And when I returned the next day, the tape was gone, and the TV had melted into itself, a warped ruin of plastic and wires that smelled like burned hair. But the worst part wasn't that. I started seeing things in every screen I looked at, reflections that weren't mine, shadows that moved wrong, And no matter where I went, what I did, every night at exactly 4:13 a.m., I wake up and find myself standing in front of a mirror or a blank screen with my hands shaking and my mouth whispering words I don't understand. And I haven't slept properly in weeks because the thing that was in the tape is with me now. It crawled out like smoke and into my lungs, into my thoughts, and sometimes I hear my father's voice screaming from behind the walls, the same way he did when I was a child. Only now he's begging me to burn the house down, to destroy everything before it finds someone else. But I can't, because I'm not in control anymore. The thing won't let me leave, and I think that's why he died alone, because he tried to run and it punished him. And now it's my turn, and every screen I look at shows a version of myself that's less human than the last, smiling too wide, moving too slow, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on, because each time I wake up I'm somewhere new, deeper in a house that doesn't make sense, with rooms that loop and ceilings that drip blood and windows that show nothing but black, and no one believes me, not the priest, not the cops, not the therapist who screamed when I described what I saw. And now even my voice doesn't sound like mine anymore, deeper, hollow, like something else is speaking through me, and I wonder if this is what happened to everyone who watched the tape, if this is what my dad saw when he locked the attic and warned me never to go in. And maybe I'm already dead. Maybe I've been dead since I hit play, because I don't remember how long I've been here, how many days have passed, and time doesn't work right anymore. Sometimes it's light for seconds and then the dark floods back in, and I hear it scratching at the walls of my skull, begging to be let out. And I think that's what it really wants, not to kill me, but to wear me, to use me to get to others, to speak through me and show people what it showed me. Because now I can't look at any screen without seeing it, standing just out of frame, waiting, always waiting. And I know it will come for you too if you ever find the tape, if you ever step into that house or look too long into your reflection at 4:13 a.m., because it's not just a haunting, it's a hunger, and I was stupid enough to feed it. Story 27. I was just a boy when it started, when the thing in the walls whispered to me for the first time, and I remember thinking it was a dream or my imagination playing tricks on me because I had been sick for days, fever burning behind my eyes, stomach twisting with every breath, and the house my parents had just bought was old and creaky and made of bones, it seemed, the way it groaned at night and sighed in the day. And I would lie there in the attic bedroom they gave me, the one no one wanted, the one with the slanted ceiling and the smell of mildew that never left no matter how many candles my mother burned, and I would stare at the knot in the wooden beam above my bed, watching it twitch like an eye whenever the wind howled. But then, one night, I heard it breathing from behind the wall, slow and deliberate, and when I pressed my ear to the paneling, it exhaled against my skin like someone hidden just behind the wood. And when I told my parents, they said it was mice or the house settling or my fever getting to my brain. But I knew what I heard, and I knew it wasn't the house because the voice started the next night, low and raspy, saying my name over and over again like it was chewing it between its teeth. And every night it got louder and clearer and closer until I started to hear it even when I wasn't in the attic, sometimes at school, in the bathroom stalls, whispering my name while I sat in silence, holding my breath, afraid someone would hear and think I was insane. And I stopped sleeping, started drawing the thing I imagined it to be in my notebooks, tall and pale and eyeless, with fingers too long to be real and teeth that curled inward like fishhooks. And the teachers called my parents, and they took me to a doctor. And the doctor gave me pills, and the pills made the voice quieter but angrier, and it told me not to trust them, not to sleep, not to open my mouth to anyone ever again. And one day it asked me to do something, just a small thing. It said, just dig a hole under my bed, just deep enough to fit a hand. And I did, with a spoon stolen from the kitchen, scraping at the floor until I reached the dirt, and when I stuck my hand into the hole, something cold and wet took it and held it tight for hours until the sun came up, and then it let go. And when I pulled my hand back out, I had bruises in the shape of fingers that didn't match mine. And that was the first time I understood that this thing wasn't just a voice, it was real. And it wanted me, and over the years it grew stronger, especially after my father left, and my mother started drinking, and I spent more time alone in that room, talking to the walls, feeding it pieces of myself, my fears, my hair, my fingernails. Sometimes even drops of blood when I was brave enough to prick my finger, and it like that, purred like a cat behind the walls, and I could feel it growing, swelling, taking shape inside the wood and the stone, and it began to move things when I asked, sliding books across the floor, slamming doors when I got angry, and sometimes it would hum to me at night, an awful, low song that made the air vibrate in my lungs, and I started to need it the way some people need God, because it was the only thing that listened, the only thing that stayed. And when my mother died, drunk and choking on her own vomit, I didn't cry. I just sat in the attic and asked it to make sure she never left me. And that night I heard her voice, soft and sweet. Story 27. I was just a boy when it started, when the thing in the walls whispered to me for the first time. And I remember thinking it was a dream or my imagination playing tricks on me because I had been sick for days, fever burning behind my eyes, stomach twisting with every breath, and the house my parents had just bought was old and creaky and made of bones, it seemed, the way it groaned at night and sighed in the day. And I would lie there in the attic bedroom they gave me, the one no one wanted, the one with the slanted ceiling and the smell of mildew that never left no matter how many candles my mother burned, and I would stare at the knot in the wooden beam above my bed, watching it twitch like an eye whenever the wind howled. But then, one night, I heard it breathing from behind the wall, slow and deliberate, and when I pressed my ear to the paneling, it exhaled against my skin like someone hidden just behind the wood. And when I told my parents, they said it was mice or the house settling or my fever getting to my brain. But I knew what I heard, and I knew it wasn't the house because the voice started the next night, low and raspy, saying my name over and over again like it was chewing it between its teeth. And every night it got louder and clearer and closer until I started to hear it even when I wasn't in the attic, sometimes at school, in the bathroom stalls, whispering my name while I sat in silence, holding my breath, afraid someone would hear and think I was insane. And I stopped sleeping, started drawing the thing I imagined it to be in my notebooks, tall and pale and eyeless, with fingers too long to be real and teeth that curled inward like fishhooks, and the teachers called my parents, and they took me to a doctor. And the doctor gave me pills, and the pills made the voice quieter but angrier, and it told me not to trust them, not to sleep, not to open my mouth to anyone ever again. And one day it asked me to do something, just a small thing. It said, just dig a hole under my bed, just deep enough to fit a hand. And I did, with a spoon stolen from the kitchen, scraping at the floor until I reached the dirt, and when I stuck my hand into the hole, something cold and wet took it and held it tight for hours until the sun came up, and then it let go. And when I pulled my hand back out, I had bruises in the shape of fingers that didn't match mine. And that was the first time I understood that this thing wasn't just a voice, it was real. And it wanted me, and over the years it grew stronger, especially after my father left, and my mother started drinking, and I spent more time alone in that room, talking to the walls, feeding it pieces of myself, my fears, my hair, my fingernails. Sometimes even Story 28. I was 24 when it started, working night shifts as a security guard in an abandoned psychiatric hospital that had been bought by a private developer but never fully renovated. A massive, echoing place full of dust and half-finished scaffolding and empty wheelchairs sitting at odd angles in shadowed halls like their owners had just stood up and walked away mid-sentence. And I took the job because it was easy money. Just sit in a booth, check the cameras, do a few patrols. But even on the first night, I could tell something was wrong with the place. Not in the way horror movies portray it with flickering lights and ghostly screams, but in the way your bones seem to tighten when you're being watched, in the way certain corners felt too still, too aware. Like the walls themselves were holding their breath while I passed by. And I tried to laugh it off because I didn't believe in ghosts or curses or any of that. Not after growing up with a paranoid schizophrenic mother who blamed spirits for the voices in her head and eventually gouged out her own eyes to stop seeing them. And after a childhood like that, you learn to dismiss things that others would find terrifying. But even still, there were nights where I felt like I wasn't alone. like someone was walking 10 paces behind me, too light to be heard, too fast to be caught. And when I checked the security footage, I'd sometimes see doors swing open on their own or the lights flicker in rooms that weren't wired yet. Or, worse, I'd see myself on the screen standing completely still in a hallway, long after I'd left that spot, unmoving, staring at something off camera with my mouth open like I was screaming. But there was no audio, just grainy black and white footage of me. Or something that looked like me, doing things I didn't remember, and when I asked my boss about it, he told me to ignore the glitches, said the system was old and half the cameras didn't even record properly. But I knew what I saw, and I started writing it all down, every odd thing, every moment I felt watched, every camera glitch, every reflection that didn't match what I was doing. And that's when the dreams started, not nightmares exactly, but slow creeping things where I'd wander through the hospital alone, past locked rooms that breathed in the dark, past windows with faces pressed against the glass, not begging for help but watching me with hunger. Story 28. I was 24 when it started, working night shifts as a security guard in an abandoned psychiatric hospital that had been bought by a private developer but never fully renovated. A massive, echoing place full of dust and half-finished scaffolding and empty wheelchairs sitting at odd angles and shadowed halls like their owners had just stood up and walked away mid-sentence. And I took the job because it was easy money. Just sit in a booth, check the cameras, do a few patrols. But even on the first night, I could tell something was wrong with the place. Not in the way horror movies portray it with flickering lights and ghostly screams, but in the way your bones seem to tighten when you're being watched, and the way certain corners felt too still, too aware. Like the walls themselves were holding their breath while I passed by. And I tried to laugh it off because I didn't believe in ghosts or curses or any of that. Not after growing up with a paranoid schizophrenic mother who blamed spirits for the voices in her head and eventually gouged out her own eyes to stop seeing them. And after a childhood like that, you learn to dismiss things that others would find terrifying. But even still, there were nights where I felt like I wasn't alone. Like someone was walking 10 paces behind me, too light to be heard, too fast to be caught. And when I checked the security footage, I'd sometimes see doors swing open on their own or the lights flicker in rooms that weren't wired yet. Or, worse, I'd see myself on the screen standing completely still in a hallway, long after I'd left that spot, unmoving, staring at something off camera with my mouth open like I was screaming. But there was no audio, just grainy black and white footage of me. Or something that looked like me, doing things I didn't remember. And when I asked my boss about it, he told me to ignore the glitches, said the system was old and half the cameras didn't even record properly. But I knew what I saw, and I started writing it all down, every odd thing, every moment I felt watched, every camera glitch, every reflection that didn't match what I was doing. And that's when the dreams started, not nightmares exactly, but slow creeping things where I'd wander through the hospital alone, past locked rooms that breathed in the dark, past windows with faces pressed against the glass, not begging for help but watching me with hunger. And in these dreams I never spoke, only moved like something else was driving me. And I'd wake up with bruises on my arms in the shape of fingers I couldn't account for, and my fingernails caked with dirt like I'd been digging in my sleep. And eventually the dreams followed me into the waking world because one night I found myself standing in the morgue level, a floor I never went to because it always smelled like old chemicals and rot, and I had no memory of walking down there. No memory of unlocking the doors, but my keys were in my hand and the security cameras showed me. Walking down step by step, staring straight ahead without blinking, and when I looked in the mirror in the break room after that, something was off. My reflection blinked slower than I did, lagged half a second behind, and its smile looked too wide, too knowing. Like it had heard a joke I didn't understand. And then one night, during a routine patrol, I found a door that shouldn't exist, set into the wall of the West Wing which had been sealed since the fire 30 years ago. A door with no handle, only a circular stain where some... Story 29. I know you won't believe me because I wouldn't have believed it either if it hadn't happened to me, if I hadn't lived it day by day, moment by moment, screaming inside my head while my face smiled without permission. But I swear to you I was normal once. A quiet person, maybe too quiet, someone who liked being alone, someone who lived simply and worked a dull office job, someone who paid rent on time and didn't make waves and rarely spoke up unless spoken to. But it started slow, like everything horrible does. It began with a smell in my apartment, faint at first, earthy and metallic, like wet copper and rot left under a floorboard too long, and I searched everywhere, tore up rugs, checked the fridge, emptied the garbage, and nothing. But the smell got stronger every night around 3 a.m., that particular hour when the world goes unnaturally silent, like even the air is holding its breath. And one night I heard footsteps in the hallway of my building, but when I looked through the peephole there was nothing there, just the overhead light swaying like someone had just passed underneath it. And I thought maybe I was overtired, maybe I was losing it, maybe the stress from work or the insomnia was finally cracking something inside me. But then things began to move, little things, keys vanishing and turning up inside the microwave, the bathroom mirror fogging up while I slept, messages appearing in the condensation that I hadn't written like, "Look behind you," and "You left it open." And my friends thought I was joking, said it was sleep paralysis, some prank, and I wanted to believe them because the alternative was unthinkable. But one night I woke up with mud on my feet and dirt under my fingernails and a long, ragged scratch across my stomach like something with nails had tried to climb out of me. And when I checked the security camera in my hallway, I saw myself standing outside my own door, completely still, for over 3 hours, not knocking, not trying to enter, just watching the peephole as if waiting for me to look out. And I didn't remember it. I had no memory of leaving my bed. And that's when I stopped sleeping altogether, terrified of Story 29. I know you won't believe me because I wouldn't have believed it either if it hadn't happened to me, if I hadn't lived it day by day, moment by moment, screaming inside my head while my face smiled without permission. But I swear to you I was normal once. A quiet person, maybe too quiet, someone who liked being alone, someone who lived simply and worked a dull office job, someone who paid rent on time and didn't make waves and rarely spoke up unless spoken to. But it started slow, like everything horrible does. It began with a smell in my apartment, faint at first, earthy and metallic, like wet copper and rot left under a floorboard too long, and I searched everywhere, tore up rugs, checked the fridge, emptied the garbage, and nothing. But the smell got stronger every night around 3 a.m., that particular hour when the world goes unnaturally silent, like even the air is holding its breath. And one night I heard footsteps in the hallway of my building, but when I looked through the peephole there was nothing there, just the overhead light swaying like someone had just passed underneath it. And I thought maybe I was overtired, maybe I was losing it, maybe the stress from work or the insomnia was finally cracking something inside me. But then things began to move, little things, keys vanishing and turning up inside the microwave, the bathroom mirror fogging up while I slept, messages appearing in the condensation that I hadn't written like, "Look behind you," and "You left it open." And my friends thought I was joking, said it was sleep paralysis, some prank, and I wanted to believe them because the alternative was unthinkable. But one night I woke up with mud on my feet and dirt under my fingernails and a long, ragged scratch across my stomach like something with nails had tried to climb out of me. And when I checked the security camera in my hallway, I saw myself standing outside my own door, completely still, for over 3 hours, not knocking, not trying to enter, just watching the peephole as if waiting for me to look out. And I didn't remember it. I had no memory of leaving my bed. And that's when I stopped sleeping altogether, terrified of what I'd do if I let myself slip away again. And it got worse because I began to see myself in places I hadn't been. Coworkers said they saw me in the elevator when I knew I'd taken the stairs. My reflection in the store window would smile when I wasn't, would wink when my eyes stayed still. And I started avoiding mirrors, started covering them with towels like my grandmother used to do when someone died, and the smell never left, that wet metallic rot that seemed to come from inside the walls or under the bed or maybe even from me. Because it was on my clothes, and my hair, and the creases of my skin. And people began to avoid me, moving away subtly on the bus, glancing at me with unease like they could smell it too, like some part of them sensed what was rotting inside, and the dreams returned, but I don't think they were dreams anymore. I think they were memories, buried pieces surfacing like bloated corpses in my mind. Memories of walking down into tunnels beneath my building that shouldn't exist, the walls slick with moss and hair, the ground crunching underfoot with teeth and fragments of bone, and I would stand before a door without a handle, a pulsing organic thing that breathed in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I would press my hands to it and feel it recognize me. And each time I returned to the waking world, I would feel less like myself, like something else had taken root inside and was pushing me further back, like I was slowly becoming the passenger in my own body. And one day I received a letter, handwritten in a language I couldn't read, but I understood it anyway, understood it in my blood, and it said that the thing I had found wasn't content anymore, that it was growing hungry and I had been chosen not as its meal but as its door. And it began to make me act in ways I couldn't control, picking up dead birds and insects, placing them carefully in the closet and sealing it with salt, speaking in my sleep, words I didn't know but understood, waking up in strange places like construction sites, sewer drains, abandoned churches, always barefoot, always. Story 30. It started with the sound, not a loud sound or a dramatic one, not a scream or a crash or something cinematic like a thunderclap at midnight, but a soft sound, subtle and nearly ignorable, like the wheeze of someone sleeping with their face too close to the wall. Except it wasn't coming from the bed, it was coming from inside the walls themselves, and I only noticed it because I was up too late, drinking cold coffee and scrolling endlessly through news articles and horror forums and weird corners of the internet, trying to forget how empty my apartment had become after she left, how dead the air felt without her perfume, and how every object I owned had her fingerprints in its history. And it was one of those nights when you start to forget you're real, like you're just a shadow of someone who used to be alive. And that's when I heard it, that shallow breathing sound coming from the wall behind my couch. Soft enough I thought I imagined it at first, until I turned off everything, TV, phone, lights, and sat perfectly still, and there it was again, a faint intake, an even fainter exhale, like something inside the wall was mimicking the rhythm of sleep, and I stood there in the dark for almost 20 minutes, frozen, listening. Not because I was brave, but because something in me needed to know that it was real, and it didn't stop, not that night, not the next. And over the following week the sound grew louder, more distinct, like it was learning how to breathe more efficiently, more confidently, and I started to press my ear to the wall, stupidly, compulsively, even though every cell in my body screamed not to, and I heard what I swear were whispers, not words exactly, but the suggestion of voices, like several people trying to speak through layers of thick, wet gauze. And it wasn't just one wall, I realized. It moved, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes in the bedroom, once in the bathroom so close I could see the mirror fog, as if someone had just taken a long hot shower, though I hadn't touched the faucet in days, and I told myself it was pipes, old building groans, maybe a rat infestation or some strange acoustics. But that illusion died the night I saw it. No, not it, just the hand at first, reaching out of the wall above the headboard like the drywall was liquid, a pale, thin hand that glistened like it was coated in sweat, its fingers stretching out blindly before retreating again in a soft, wet squelch. And I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stared at the faint outline of where it had been as the wall hardened again like flesh turning back into stone. And I should have left then, should have grabbed my keys and run into the street barefoot, screaming, calling anyone, going anywhere. But instead I stayed, transfixed, horrified, because part of me wanted to see it again, to understand what was happening. Because in some sick part of my mind, I thought maybe I was going insane, and if I could just look long enough, I'd see the edges of the hallucination and prove to myself it wasn't real, but it was real, and it wanted me to know it, because it began leaving things behind, a single long hair in the sink, soaking wet and tangled in the drain. Muddy prints on the ceiling above my bed like someone had walked across it upside down. The sound of crying from inside my closet even when it stood wide open and empty, and the worst part wasn't that I was scared. It was that I was starting to feel comforted by its presence, like a stray dog that kept following me and eventually felt like company, and soon I began to see it, not fully, never in one glimpse, just fragments, a mouth with far too many teeth curled and a grin behind the shower curtain. A silhouette in the fogged-up mirror standing behind me but never reflected when I turned. And I watching me from the crack in the floorboards that blinked when I covered it up. And I stopped sleeping, barely eating, isolating completely. Because how could I explain to anyone that my apartment had become alive with something that wasn't quite a ghost, wasn't quite a monster, but something older, something patient, something parasitic that was slowly unraveling my sense of self. And then it began speaking, not in my ears, not aloud, but in my mind, just occasional words at first, simple ones like closer and hungry and see. And when I closed my eyes, I saw its shape behind my eyelids, thin and long and human-like only in the way mannequins are human-like, not quite right, not quite real. And it told me it had always lived here, even before the building existed, that the walls were its skin, the floorboards its ribs, the vents its throat, and that I was the first to stay long enough to let it in. And when I asked why me, it laughed. Not a sound, but a feeling, a vibration that rattled my teeth and twisted my stomach. And it said, "You were hollow." And that word stuck in my brain like a sliver of glass because it was right. I had been empty. I had let grief hollow me out, and then it filled the space she left behind. And I began letting it touch me, letting it press its face against mine while I lay in bed too paralyzed to move, its breath filling my lungs until I couldn't tell which breath was mine and which was its. And one night I woke up with a taste in my mouth that wasn't mine, coppery and thick, and blood smeared on the inside of my pillowcase and a chunk of something black and oily beneath my fingernails that flinched when I touched it. And the mirror had writing on it in what looked like bone dust, almost done. And I didn't know what that meant until the following week when I started to lose time, full hours vanishing. Waking up standing in front of the wall with my hands pressed flat against it like I was praying. And I'd find bruises in the shape of fingers around my wrists, on my ankles, on my neck. And I knew I wasn't dreaming anymore, I was becoming it. Merging with it, whatever it was, and my reflection started to smile even. When I wasn't, to linger even after I walked away. And sometimes I'd catch it waving, just slightly, like it was practicing being me. And last night, for the first time, it stepped through, fully, shamelessly. A perfect replica of me that stood in the living room and blinked slowly while I lay paralyzed in bed and watched it make coffee, check its phone, laugh, walk outside into the daylight and leave me behind. And now I don't know if I'm real anymore. I don't know if I'm the original or just the part of me it didn't want, the hollow shell it used and left behind. And I don't know how to scream for help because my mouth doesn't obey me anymore. My voice only works when it lets me speak. And I can feel it inside the walls even now, pacing, waiting, practicing. And if you're hearing this, if you're reading this, I need you to understand it's not a story, it's a warning. Because I was just like you, curious, lonely, scrolling late into the night. And if your walls start to breathe, if your reflection begins to smile, if you hear crying when you're alone, then don't look, don't listen. And for the love of whatever's left of you, never press your ear to the wall. Story 31. I haven't told anyone this story because I don't think there's a single person on this earth who would believe it. And even as I write it down now with my hands trembling and my skin crawling like it remembers every detail my mind tries to forget, I can already hear the whispers again in the corners of the room behind the walls behind my thoughts. But I have to tell it because I can't be the only one this thing finds and uses and feeds on. And maybe if I write it down, it'll stop crawling around inside me like a memory I never had but somehow always carried. And it started when I moved into that old house on the edge of Halbert Street. The one everyone in the neighborhood called the Crooked House because it slouched a little to the left like something broken at the spine, and no one ever saw the windows open or the lights on, even though there was never a for sale sign or any record of who owned it before me. And I didn't think much of it at the time. I just needed a place cheap enough to afford and far enough away from the city and the noise and the people, because after everything with my brother, after they found his body but never his face, I needed distance like I needed air, and that house gave me both. And the first few days were quiet, lonely even, like the house was waiting for me to settle in and lower my guard. And I started hearing it the first Friday night, a kind of tapping, not from the roof, or the windows like you'd expect in an old place, but from under the floorboards, rhythmic, deliberate, like someone knocking in code. And I tried to tell myself it was just pipes or raccoons or my nerves, and maybe it would have stayed like that. Just strange noises in a weird old house if I hadn't opened the basement door, which I wasn't even sure existed until I tripped over a floorboard that clicked loose and revealed a narrow wooden stairwell that curved down into the dark like a throat, and I should have left it alone, should have nailed the board back down and walked away, but I couldn't. Something about it called to me like a dare, like a forgotten word I almost remembered, and I took my flashlight and went down, and the air got colder with every step, not just temperature cold but memory cold. Like the space remembered something it wanted me to feel, and at the bottom was a dirt floor and 3 walls, but the 4th wall was just wrong, like a painting pretending to be a wall, too smooth, too clean, and when I touched it, it felt soft like damp paper. And I pushed, just a little, and it gave way like skin. And that's when I heard the breathing, not mine, not close, but near enough to feel the echo in my chest. And I ran back upstairs and slammed the door and nailed the board shut again and told myself it was all in my head, but I knew better because that night I dreamed of my brother's face the way they described it at the funeral, missing, torn off. Like someone had peeled it away and worn it, and when I woke up my bedroom mirror was covered in long smudges like fingers had traced it from the inside, spelling nothing, just dragging across the glass like it wanted to be seen. And over the next few days the house started changing, not in big ways, but in subtle shifts that made my stomach twist. Doors closing an inch more than they had the day before, shadows lingering longer than they should have, the taps running dark red for a second before turning clear again. And the thing is, I started to feel like I wasn't alone anymore, like there was something living just out of view, breathing behind me, watching through the walls, whispering when I slept, and sometimes, if I woke up fast enough, I could hear it stop whispering like it knew I could almost catch the words, and I started staying up longer and longer until sleep felt like drowning, and I was half mad with exhaustion and paranoia, and that's when the dreams changed, became clearer, became memories. Not mine, never mine, but vivid and real as daylight, memories of long dark tunnels, of digging with bare hands, of something ancient buried beneath screaming dirt and clawing roots. And I'd wake up with soil under my fingernails and bloody welts on my arms, and once I woke with a mouthful of black hair that wasn't mine, long and coarse and knotted with dirt, and I knew that it wasn't just haunting me, it was trying to enter me, trying to use me. And then the scratching started, from inside the walls, and not like rodents or raccoons, but deep scratching, like fingernails against bone, slow and deliberate, and always near the bedroom when I was trying to sleep. And it would whisper through the vents now, actual words this time, soft and hungry. Things like, "You're the right shape," and "It's almost time," and "He wore your brother too." And I'd cry without making a sound because something told me not to let it know I was afraid, because fear was an invitation. And I started sleeping in the kitchen with the lights on and the stove lit like a holy fire, but even then I'd hear it pacing upstairs, and sometimes the lights would flicker and I'd see it for just a fraction of a second, tall, skin like split leather, mouth too wide, wearing my brother's smile like a mask, and I wanted to burn the place down. I swear I did. But I couldn't leave. My keys were always missing. The front door never budged. My phone never held a charge, and I was too far from neighbors to scream. And I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, just sat in the corner rocking and muttering the Lord's Prayer backward like it was some kind of ward. But the thing kept getting stronger, more solid, more confident, until one night I woke up standing in front of the basement door, the nail boards torn out behind me. And my hands were covered in dirt, and my mouth tasted like ash and copper, and I didn't remember moving. And then I saw the footprints, not mine, wet, muddy, leading from the basement to my bed, then back again. Story 31. I haven't told anyone this story because I don't think there's a single person on this earth who would believe it, and even as I write it down now with my hands trembling and my skin crawling like it remembers every detail my mind tries to forget, I can already hear the whispers again in the corners of the room behind the walls behind my thoughts, but I have to tell it because I can't be the only one this thing finds and uses and feeds on, and maybe if I write it down it'll stop crawling around. inside me like a memory I never had but somehow always carried, and it started when I moved into that old house on the edge of Halbert Street. The one everyone in the neighborhood called the Crooked House because it slouched a little to the left like something broken at the spine, and no one ever saw the windows open or the lights on, even though there was never a for sale sign or any record of who owned it before me. And I didn't think much of it at the time. I just needed a place cheap enough to afford and far enough away from the city and the noise and the people, because after everything with my brother, after they found his body but never his face, I needed distance like I needed air, and that house gave me both. And the first few days were quiet. Lonely even, like the house was waiting for me to settle in and lower. Story 32. I don't know when it started exactly. Maybe it was when I moved into the house, or maybe it was years earlier and I just didn't notice until things had already gone too far. But I know now that what I thought was depression, what I thought was grief, what I thought was just the weight of my mother's death sitting on my chest like a boulder I couldn't lift, was actually something else, something older, colder, and infinitely more patient than anything I could have imagined. And it lived in the walls of that house. It breathed with the vents. It hummed under the floors. It watched me while I slept and waited for me to be too tired to fight back. And when I was little, I remember my mother locking the basement door and whispering to it like it could hear. Whispering things like, "Not this time," and "He's not ready," and "You don't get to take him too." And I thought she was just broken, just tired, just another adult cracking under the pressure of a life unlived. But when she died, suddenly, falling down those basement steps in a way that didn't make sense, no bruises on her legs, just her head caved in like someone had slammed it down, I found that same key she always wore around her neck lodged in her throat, and I thought it was an accident. Maybe suicide, maybe guilt, because she always said my brother didn't run away like the police told us, but that he was still in the house somewhere. And after her funeral, when I came back to clean up her things, I heard the whispers. Too, not out loud, but behind my thoughts, like my brain was tuning into a frequency I had never been able to hear before. And that first night I stayed alone there, I swear I woke up in the kitchen with the oven open and burning, my hand resting inside it and blisters already forming, and I wasn't asleep. I was aware, just not in control. And after that night, I started sleeping with my shoes on, lights on, and my back to a wall because I could feel it moving, shifting, waiting. And I thought, maybe it was just the trauma, but then I found the old photo albums under her bed, the ones she kept locked in a metal box and labeled with names I'd never heard, Benjamin, Thomas, Clara, and faces that looked like me, looked like my brother, but distorted. Eyes gouged out in ink, mouths cut out with razors, as if someone had tried to erase the identity but not the memory, and tucked between the pages was a note that simply read, "Keep the key out of your mouth," and I wanted to burn it all. I really did, but something about the house made me stay, made me linger, like it planted roots in my feet and my lungs. And when I started hearing scratching behind the walls, I tore them open looking for rats but found nothing. Just dust and old bones the size of baby birds, hundreds of them wrapped in hair and strips of old cloth. And I tried calling someone, anyone, but the landline just buzzed with static and my cell phone wouldn't hold a charge. And the electricity started flickering only. When I tried to speak out loud about the house, like it knew I was telling someone, like it punished me for trying to escape. And one night the TV turned on by itself and played a tape of a birthday party I didn't remember. Children wearing masks that looked like my face, clapping while a cake was placed in front of a boy who had no eyes but wore my brother's shirt. And when I turned it off, the screen stayed lit and showed my reflection. But it wasn't me, it was it, smiling wide and dripping. Something black from its mouth, and I started locking myself in the bathroom for hours just to think, just to breathe. But even the tiles started to sweat, and the mirror fogged when I wasn't using the water. And eventually I found the crawl space behind the linen closet, the one she always nailed shut, and inside was a small wooden chair with restraints, like a child's high chair, and stains so dark they had turned the wood soft. And carved into the wall was a word I didn't recognize, but I kept saying it in my sleep anyway. According to the voice memos I started recording just to prove I wasn't losing my mind, and when I played them back, the voice wasn't mine. It was deeper, older, layered with others beneath it like a choir of drowned children, all whispering, "We were born in his mouth." And I stopped sleeping after that, for real this time, because I knew the house wanted me unconscious, vulnerable, pliable, and I started hallucinating even when I was awake, faces and doorknobs, mouths opening in the grain of wood, the carpet breathing like it was alive, and I started bleeding from the gums, the nose, the eyes, like something inside me was trying to force its way out. And that's when I remembered what she said the last night before she died. When she was staring into the empty fireplace and muttering, "He'll were you next, just like your brother." And I thought it was metaphorical, poetic even. But then the mirror in my room cracked from the inside and I saw it, me, but not me. Standing behind the glass, skin tighter, eyes darker, smiling like it knew it had already won, and I ran, finally ran, tried to escape, but the door was gone, just gone, replaced by a wall that wasn't there before, and every window showed me different scenes. My own death, over and over, from different angles, different years, different clothes, and I realized then that the house wasn't in time, it was outside of it, feeding on memory, on identity, and I wasn't the first, not by a long shot. And when I found the journals hidden beneath the floorboards, they weren't all written by her. Some dated back over 100 years, and all of them ended the same way. He opened the mouth and it swallowed him, and I don't know who he is, but I hear him breathing when I sleep. I feel him moving under my skin, and every time I look in the mirror now I see less of me and more of him. And I've taken to writing this down in case I don't make it through the next sleep, because it's getting harder to tell what's dream and what's memory and what's just the house rewriting me into something it needs, something it can use. And if you ever find yourself on Pine Grove Lane, if you ever feel the need to knock on the green door with the brass knocker shaped like a jawbone, don't. Because it's not a house, it never was, it's a mouth. And once you walk through it, you start to taste the memories of others and forget your own. And it will wear you like a mask. It will move you like a puppet, and your voice will echo in the walls long after your bones have been forgotten. Story 33. I never wanted to believe it, never wanted to admit it. But now, as I sit here and stare at the clock on the wall, waiting for the hands to start moving again, I can't deny that something terrible has been following me for as long as I can remember, a darkness that clung to me like a second skin. Something that hid in the shadows of my childhood, in the corners of my mind, in the quiet of my thoughts when no one was looking. And I only realized what it was when I was much older, when I started seeing it, or him. I'm not sure what it was, but it was there, a figure, tall, dark, with eyes that glinted like cold, hollow pits, always in the periphery of my vision, never quite close enough to touch, but always close enough to feel. And it wasn't until that first night when I came home from college, tired and sick from a bad breakup, and found my mother gone, just gone, like she had vanished into the thin air that hung heavy in the room, that I started to understand. Because she'd always told me about the thing that had been in the house, the thing she'd tried to protect me from, the thing she said had come from the shadows, that it wore the faces of those it took, and that one day it would come for me, too. And I never believed her. Thought she was just crazy, just tired, just saying things to keep me safe, to keep me inside. But when I saw the marks on the walls, the deep gouges that had been scraped across the paint like claws, I knew that something had been here. Something that wasn't human. And as I stood there in the middle of the living room, feeling the weight of the silence crush me, I heard it for the first time, the low, guttural sound of breathing coming from behind the walls, slow and deliberate, and I froze. My heart pounding in my chest as the air in the room grew thick and stifling, and I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling. But deep down I knew better, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had taken my mother had left something behind, something that was waiting for me to find it. And I remember the first time I saw its eyes in the dark, staring at me from across the room, glowing like embers in the pitch black, and I wanted to scream, wanted to run. But my legs wouldn't move. My feet were frozen to the floor as I stared back at it, and it didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched. And I could feel it, deep inside me, scraping at my thoughts, pulling at the edges of my mind like it was trying to get in, trying to take hold of me. And I turned away, And for weeks, I tried to forget it, to push it out of my mind, to think it was just a product of stress or the exhaustion from school. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, standing just outside my vision, and sometimes, when I walked into a room, I would feel its presence lingering behind me, cold, dark, watching, and then the strange things started happening, small things at first. Keys would go missing. My phone would be off when I knew I'd left it on. The faucet would drip even though I had turned it off hours ago. But then they started getting worse, louder, like something was trying to make its presence known. And one night, I woke up to the sound of scratching coming from the closet. Scratching that didn't stop, didn't pause, just dragged on, until I got up, heart racing, and opened the door to find nothing but an empty space, the air in there cold, biting, and I remember thinking it was just rats, just an animal. But when I closed the door, I felt a rush of cold air behind me, and when I turned around, there it was again, the dark figure, standing in the doorway, and this time it moved, slowly, impossibly slow, like it was savoring every moment. And I knew I couldn't outrun it, couldn't escape it, but I couldn't stop myself from running anyway, and I ran for hours, into the night, until I reached the old cemetery near the edge of town, the one my mother had always told me to stay away from. The one where she said the people buried there were different, where she said the shadows never left, and I don't know why I went there. Maybe to hide, maybe to escape. But when I got to the center of the cemetery, I collapsed, breathless, and looked up at the full moon hanging like a bloodshot eye in the sky. And that's when I saw it again, standing at the far end of the graveyard, waiting, watching, and I wanted to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. And then it was like something clicked in. My head, like a part of me that had been missing, had just snapped back into place. And I realized what it wanted. It wanted me to look into its eyes, wanted me to understand that it was always with me, that it had never left. And as I stood there frozen in place, I felt the ground shift beneath me, felt the earth moving, trembling, and then the voices started, soft at first, like a whisper in the wind, but then louder, clearer, until I could hear them all around me, calling my name, calling me into the dark. And that's when I understood, truly understood, that it wasn't just following me, it wasn't just haunting me, it was feeding on me, feeding on the fear, feeding on the pain. And the more I fought it, the stronger it became. The more it twisted and warped into something even worse, something unnatural. And I thought if I could just get away, just run fast enough, it wouldn't catch me. But every time I tried to escape, it was there, waiting, always one step ahead, always, pulling me back into its grasp. And I started to lose track of time, started to lose myself, until one day I woke up and didn't know where I was, didn't know who I was, and I realized then that it had already won, that it had taken me completely, twisted me into something I didn't recognize. And now, as I sit here in this dark room with the clock ticking on the wall, I realize that I am no longer me, that the thing in the shadows has worn my face, has lived my life, has taken everything I was, and turned it into a mask it can wear forever. And I can feel it in the back of my mind, feel it shifting like a parasite, feeding on the remnants of who I used to be. And I can't remember how long it's been since I last saw daylight, since I last felt the sun on my skin. But I know that I will never escape, because the thing that followed me has already become me. And the worst part is that I can still hear my mother's voice sometimes, whispering from the other side, telling me to stay away, to run before it's too late. But it is too late. It's always been too late. And now I am just another piece of the dark, another shadow waiting to be forgotten. Story 34. I didn't believe in ghosts, at least not at first. I always thought that everything my grandmother told me when I was little, stories about the house being haunted, about the things she saw that no one else did, were just tall tales, the kind of things older people say to entertain or scare the younger generation. And when I moved into that house after she passed away, I thought it would be just a place to sleep, a place to start over, maybe find some peace in the clutter of old furniture and memories she'd left behind. But I never expected it to start happening so soon. And I remember the first night I spent there clearly. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and the silence felt thick, like it was suffocating me. But I convinced myself it was just the isolation of being alone, the house settling into its years, until I heard it, that soft scraping noise coming from the kitchen, like a chair moving across the floor, slow and deliberate. And I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just the wind or the house creaking. But when I went to check, nothing was out of place. The room was exactly how I had left it, but the feeling didn't go away, that feeling of being watched, like there was something just behind me, waiting. And for the next few days, I tried to go about my business, unpacking boxes, cleaning the house. But every time I'd get to the living room, I'd notice something was different, a book out of place, a picture on the mantel slightly askew, as if someone was moving things when I wasn't looking, and the shadows started growing longer in the corners of the room, stretching toward me as if they had a life of their own. And I started sleeping with the lights on because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there with me in the dark. And every time I looked at the reflection in the window, I saw a movement behind me, always just out of view, and it got worse the longer I stayed there. Objects would vanish and then reappear in strange places, like my keys in the freezer or my coat hanging in the bathroom. And I thought I was losing my mind. But then the dreams started, the dreams of a tall figure, always standing at the edge of my vision, just watching, never moving, never speaking, and the feeling of terror would wake me up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. And when I'd look around, everything was still, everything was silent. But I could feel it, feel something in the air pressing down on me, like it was just waiting for the moment when I would let my guard down. And I tried to talk to people, tried to get someone to stay with me, but no one seemed to understand. They thought it was just my imagination, that I was stressed out from the move, but it didn't feel like that. It felt real, like something was lurking in the house, something that wanted me to know it was there. And one night, when the house was especially quiet, I decided to go down to the basement, where my grandmother used to say the worst things were hidden, and I hadn't wanted to go down there, not even once since I moved in. But that night, the pull was stronger than ever, like something was calling me down there, and the stairs creaked under my feet as I descended into the darkness, the air thick with dust and the scent of old wood. And when I reached the bottom, I felt it, the cold, unnatural chill that seemed to wrap itself around me, as if the air itself was alive. And there, in the far corner, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, an old wooden chest that hadn't been there the last time I checked. And I approached it cautiously, my hands shaking as I reached for the latch. And when I opened it, I found nothing but an old journal, yellowed with age, its pages brittle and fragile, and I knew I shouldn't read it. But I couldn't stop myself, and as I turned the pages, I realized the handwriting was my grandmother's. But the words weren't hers. Not really, not entirely. And the more I read, the more I understood that the house had always been this way, that it was never just a house, that it had always been waiting for someone to stay, waiting for someone to be alone. And the entries were full of strange things, things that didn't make sense, about doors that appeared where there were none, about rooms that shifted, about the shadows that lived in the corners, and about the thing that had been watching her for years, something that had been living in the walls, in the spaces between the house and the world, something that had followed her from place to place. And I couldn't stop reading, couldn't stop myself as I read the words that made my blood run cold. It's not the house you have to be afraid of. It's the thing that's inside it, the thing that wears your face and waits for you to fall asleep so it can take your place. And when I reached the final page, there was a name scrawled in a hurried, trembling hand, Alistair, and I couldn't understand it, couldn't make sense of it, but I could feel the weight of the name in the air pressing down on me. And that night, as I lay in bed, trying to forget the things I had learned, I heard it, the sound of a door opening slowly, quietly, as if it was trying not to wake me. And when I sat up in bed, I saw the door to my bedroom standing open, the hallway beyond dark and empty. But I knew it wasn't empty. And I didn't wait to find out what was standing there. What Story 35. I don't really know where it started, but I've always